Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I know that sounds like the start of every campfire story you've ever heard, but this isn't fiction. I wish it was. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam as a medic before I found my way to the Great Smoky Mountains. Something about these ancient hills called to me after all that chaos overseas. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe I just needed to save people in a place where the biggest threat was supposed to be a twisted ankle or a curious bear. Whisper Ridge was my station, a remote outpost 30 miles from the nearest town. I'd rescued 47 lost hikers in my time there. I knew every trail marker, every creek crossing, every place where city folks might get turned around. The old-timers in town always talked about mountain folk and strange things in the deep woods, but I never paid attention. I dealt in facts, compass readings, weather reports, first aid. That changed in October of 1976. The Henderson family from Atlanta had been camping near Cades Cove when they stumbled into my office, white as sheets. Dad could barely talk straight. Mom kept looking over her shoulder. The kids, twin boys about 8 years old, wouldn't stop crying. "Something's wrong with those people," Mr. Henderson kept saying. "They followed us for hours, just watching." "What people?" I asked, pulling out my incident report form. "Mountain people. But they weren't right. They moved wrong. And their faces." He shuddered. Their faces looked empty. Mrs. Henderson grabbed my arm. "We left everything, our tent, our car. It's still out there. We walked 12 miles to get here." I'd seen scared campers before, but this felt different. The Hendersons had that 1,000-yard stare I recognized from the war. They'd seen something that broke their understanding of the world. I drove them to town and promised to check their campsite in the morning. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in my quiet mountains. The wind sounded different through the pines, almost like whispers. I should have listened to that feeling. The next morning, I found their abandoned camp just where they'd described. Their blue dome tent sat untouched, but everything else was wrong. Someone had arranged their belongings in a perfect circle around the cold fire pit. Folding chairs, cooler, hiking boots, even the kids' comic books. Each item faced inward like people sitting around a table. But it was the footprints that made my blood run cold. They started normal enough. Boot prints in the soft dirt around the tent. But as I followed the trail into the woods, they began to change. The heel marks got deeper, like someone was dragging their feet. The toe impressions started blurring together. By the time I'd walked 50 yards, I was looking at prints that didn't look human anymore. The toes had fused into club-like shapes. Bones seemed to be pushing through where the heels should be. I knelt down for a closer look, and that's when my radio started acting up. Instead of the usual Park Service chatter, I heard music, old mountain ballads playing backward. The melody was haunting and wrong, like someone had taken a lullaby and turned it into a funeral song. My compass spun like a toy, but instead of finding magnetic north, the needle kept pointing toward the same ridge, always the same ridge. I called it into headquarters, but how do you report impossible footprints and backward music? I stuck to the facts. Abandoned campsite, possible harassment of campers, requesting backup for area patrol. That afternoon, I met with Emma Caldwell, the local historian. Emma knew every story, every legend, every tragedy these mountains had witnessed. If anyone could explain what I'd found, it would be Ed Shah's. "At Whisper Ridge," she said when I described the location. Her face went pale. "Jake, you need to stay away from that area." "Why? What happened there?" Emma pulled out an old leather journal from her files. Mining accident, 1889. The Consolidated Coal Company was digging shafts all through those hills. 23 men got trapped when the main tunnel collapsed during a winter storm. Took 3 months to dig them out. 3 months underground? I felt sick imagining it. Only one came out alive. Fellow named Samuel Brennan. He kept a journal the whole time. She opened the book carefully. The things he wrote toward the end. Jake, they weren't just dealing with cave-ins and starvation down there. She showed me pages filled with increasingly desperate handwriting. The entries started normal. Complaints about the cold, rationing food, digging at the cave-in. But as the weeks passed, the tone changed. Day 23. Morrison died today. We had to make a choice. Day 31. Something came into the tunnels. We can hear it moving in the deep places. Day 45. It's not killing us. It's worse than that. It's making us empty. Day 52. I'm the only one left who remembers being human. The final entry was just one line, written in shaky letters. They're still down there, and they're still hungry. Every 13 years, Emma said quietly, people go missing around Whisper Ridge, always near the anniversary of the cave-in. Park Service keeps it quiet, but the pattern's been going on for almost a century. I felt that chill again, the one that told me my world was about to get much stranger. Emma, what exactly do you think is down there? She closed the journal. Something that used to be human. Something that remembers being alive but can't feel it anymore. As I drove back to the station, the October sun was setting behind Whisper Ridge. The mountain looked different now, not like a peaceful landmark, but like a giant gravestone marking something that should have stayed buried. That night I dreamed about 23 men trapped in the dark and woke up with the taste of coal dust in my mouth. The next morning brought Tim Hughes, a young ranger fresh out of training. Tim was everything I used to be, eager, rational, convinced that every problem had a logical solution. He'd requested the transfer to work with me after hearing about my rescue record. What he didn't know, and what I only learned later, was that his great-grandfather had been one of the 23 miners trapped in Whisper Ridge. "So what's this about missing campers?" Tim asked, spreading maps across my desk. I showed him the Henderson campsite photos and the strange footprint trail. Tim studied them with the serious expression of someone trying very hard to find a normal explanation. "Could be bears," he said finally. "When the ground's soft, bear prints can look distorted. Bears that arrange camping gear in ritual circles? Okay, so maybe we've got some local kids playing pranks. You know how mountain families can be about outsiders." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe there was a simple answer. But that afternoon our equipment started malfunctioning in ways that made no sense. We were patrolling the trail near Whisper Ridge when both our radios died simultaneously. Not static, not low battery, just dead silence like someone had flipped a switch. My flashlight dimmed to nothing even though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. Tim's camera wouldn't focus. Every picture came out as gray static. "Must be some kind of electromagnetic interference," Tim said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. That's when we saw the trees. In a perfect circle around what looked like an old mine entrance, every pine and oak was dying. Not the gradual brown of autumn, but the sick gray of something poisoned from the roots up. The bark hung in strips like peeling skin. The ground inside the circle was bare dirt, too sterile even for we. "Jesus," Tim whispered. "What could cause this?" I was about to answer when movement caught my eye. At the tree line, maybe 50 yards away, a figure stood watching us. At first glance, it looked like a man in work clothes, the kind of sturdy pants and shirt a miner might wear. But something was wrong with the proportions. The arms hung too long, the head tilted at an angle that should have been impossible. "Tim," I said quietly, "do you see that?" He followed my gaze, and I heard him suck in a sharp breath. "That guy in the trees?" "Yeah. Notice anything strange about him?" The figure stood perfectly still, and as we watched, I realized what was bothering me. The face looked like a mask, skin stretched tight over nothing, with dark holes where the eyes should be. "He's just standing there," Tim said. Should we approach? Before I could answer, the figure turned and melted back into the forest without making a sound. Not the normal rustling you'd expect from someone moving through underbrush, just silence. We found his tracks easily enough, the same fused toe prints I'd seen at the Henderson campsite, but these were fresh, still warm to the touch. Okay, Tim said, trying to keep his voice steady. So we've got someone playing games in the woods, someone with deformed feet. That night, I called Emma Caldwell. You saw one of them, didn't you? She said before I even described what had happened. One of what, Emma? The Hollow Men. That's what my grandmother called them. She said they looked human from far away, but up close you could see they were empty inside. What do you mean, empty? Whatever made them human got sucked out of them down in those mines. Now they're just shells. Walking around, remembering what it felt like to be alive, but never able to feel it again. The next day, Tim and I returned to the area with backup equipment. Extra batteries, a backup radio, emergency flares. We were going to document everything properly and file a complete report. We never got the chance. Ruth Hensley found us first. Ruth was one of the old mountain women, born and raised in these hills. She must have been 80 years old, but she moved through the forest like someone half her age. You boys need to get away from this place, she said without any introduction. Need to get away now. Ma'am, we're conducting an official investigation. Investigation? Ruth laughed, but there was no humor in it. Boy, you can't investigate something that's been feeding on folks for near 100 years. You can just stay away from it and hope it don't notice you. She pointed toward Whisper Ridge. They ain't got souls no more. Got sucked out of them in the dark. Now they're always hungry, always looking for something to fill up that empty space inside. What do they want? I asked. Ruth looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. They want to feel alive again, and the only way they can do that is to take the life out of someone else. As if summoned by her words, Tim's radio crackled to life. His voice came through the speaker, clear as day. Jake, can you hear me? I need help. I'm lost in the deep dark. Come find me, Jake. The only problem was, Tim was standing right next to me. Tim stared at the radio like it had grown teeth. His face went white as his own voice continued coming through the speaker. Jake, I'm scared. It's so dark down here. Please come get me. Please. I grabbed the radio. This is Morrison. Who is this? How are you broadcasting on our frequency? The voice that answered wasn't Tim's anymore. It was older, rougher, with the accent of someone who'd lived in these mountains a century ago. Come to the deep dark, Jake Morrison. Come see what we've become. Then silence. Tim was shaking. That was my voice. That was my exact voice. How is that possible? I didn't have an answer. I was too busy remembering Emma's words about things that could mimic human speech, things that remembered bass, being alive but couldn't feel it anymore. That afternoon we found more evidence. Fresh scratches on tree bark, carved too high for a human to reach without a ladder. Piles of stones arranged, in patterns that hurt to look at. And everywhere, those impossible footprints leading deeper into the forest. We need to call this in, Tim said. Get a full search team out here. But when we tried to radio headquarters, all we got was static. Our cell phones showed no signal. Even the emergency satellite phone came up dead. It was like something was jamming every form of communication. As evening approached, I made the decision that probably saved our lives, temporarily. We're heading back to the station, I told Tim. We'll drive to town, report this in person, and come back with a full team tomorrow. Tim nodded, but as we started down the trail, he stopped. Jake, do you hear that? I listened. Somewhere in the distance, barely audible, someone was calling for help. A man's voice, echoing through the trees. Help! Somebody help me, I'm trapped! Every instinct I had as a ranger told me to investigate. 15 years of training and 47 successful rescues demanded that I find whoever was in trouble. It could be another camper, Tim said. Someone else who ran into whatever this is. The voice came again, closer now. Please, I can see your flashlights. Don't leave me here. I was already moving toward the sound when Ruth Hensley's voice echoed in my memory. They want to feel alive again, and the only way they can do that is to take the life out of someone else. Tim, I said quietly, when did you last check your flashlight? He looked down at his hand. His flashlight wasn't on. Neither was mine. We hadn't turned them on since the batteries died that afternoon. But somehow, someone could see our lights. Run, I whispered. We crashed through the underbrush like spooked deer, branches tearing at our clothes, roots trying to trip us with every step. Behind us, the voice kept calling, but it was changing, getting deeper, more desperate, less human. D. Don't leave us. We've been alone so long, we just want to feel something again. I risked a look back and saw them. 3 figures following us through the trees, moving faster than anything human should be able to move. They ran with that same wrong gait I'd seen in the footprints, feet landing too hard, arms swinging too loose. But the worst part was their faces. Even in the dim evening light, I could see they were empty. Just skins stretched over skull cavities with holes where their eyes and mouths should be. We made it to the truck, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The battery was completely dead, even though it had been fine an hour earlier. The spare radio, Tim gasped, diving into the back of the truck. He pulled out our emergency radio and tried to raise headquarters. Nothing but static at first, then slowly, voices began to come through. Voices I recognized. My own voice. Tim's hurt bad. He's bleeding. We need immediate medical evacuation. Tim's voice. Jake's trapped in the mine. Send help, send everyone. The voice of my supervisor from headquarters. All units, we have multiple casualties at Whisper Ridge. Approach with extreme caution. Then Emma Caldwell's voice, even though she wasn't a ranger. They're all dead. Every single one of them is dead. But the most terrifying was Ruth Hensley, her mountain accent clear through the static. They ain't never coming back. They belong to the Hollow Men now. Tim threw the radio down. This is impossible. Those conversations never happened. Through the windshield, I could see the 3 figures approaching our truck. They moved with deliberate slowness now, as if they knew we couldn't escape. That's when I remembered the emergency flares in the glove compartment. I struck the first flare and red light filled the truck cab. The moment the flame appeared, the figures stopped. They hovered at the edge of the lit, swaying like trees in a wind I couldn't feel. They don't like fire, I told Tim. Ruth said something about flame driving them back. I climbed out of the truck, holding the flare like a weapon. The Hollow Men, because that's what they were, what they had to be, retreated a few steps. But they didn't leave. They circled us, staying just outside the light, waiting. Jake, Tim whispered. Look. More figures were emerging from the forest. Dozens of them, all in the same mining clothes, all with those terrible empty faces. They surrounded our truck in a perfect circle, just like the arrangement of camping gear at the Henderson site. And at the front of the group, I saw a figure I recognized. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a Park Service uniform. It looked exactly like Tim. That's impossible, the real Tim breathed. That can't be me. The Tim thing tilted its head and spoke with Tim's exact voice. Jake, why won't you come help me? I'm scared and alone in the dark, just like they were scared and alone. Then it smiled, and I saw that its mouth was just another empty hole in its face. The flare was burning down. In a few minutes, we'd be in darkness with things that had been human once, but weren't anymore. Things that wanted to fill the emptiness inside them with whatever made us alive. Tim, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. In the back of the truck, there's a toolbox with road flares for emergencies. Can you reach it without getting out? He nodded and crawled carefully into the truck bed. I heard him rummaging through equipment while I held the dying flare high. The Hollow Men pressed closer as the light faded. I could smell them now, the deep earth smell of mine shafts and something else, something like meat left too long in the sun. Got them, Tim called out. Light 3 at once, I ordered. And Tim, whatever happens next, don't look at their faces too long. Don't listen when they use our voices. Because I was starting to understand what Emma had tried to tell me. These things didn't just want to kill us, they wanted to hollow us out, leave us walking around empty like them, hungry for something we'd never be able to find. The flares blazed to life just as the first one died out. Red light pushed back the darkness, and the hollow men retreated again. But there were so many of them now, and we only had so many flares. "Jake," Tim said, his voice tight with terror. "How do we get out of this?" I looked at the circle of empty faces surrounding us and realized something that should have terrified me, but somehow didn't. "We don't run," I said. "We go deeper." "Deeper?" Tim stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Jake, those things came from underground. Why would we go toward their nest?" I kept the flares burning while my mind raced through everything I'd learned. The mining accident, Samuel Brennan's journal, the 13-year cycle of disappearances. "Because they're not complete yet," I said. "Look at them. They're hollow, empty. But they're still bound to this place, still tied to whatever happened in those mines. If we can get to the source, you want to go into the mine shaft. It's the only way. Out here, we're in their territory. Down there, maybe we can find what's keeping them tethered to this world." The hollow men pressed closer, and I could see more details in the flare light that I wished I couldn't. Their clothes were rotting but somehow still intact. Their skin had the gray pallor of something that had been underground too long, and their eyes, the holes where their eyes should be, seemed to pull at the light like black holes. "Jake Morrison," the Tim thing said in perfect imitation of Tim's voice. "Why are you afraid of us? We used to be like you. We remember having hearts that beat, lungs that breathed. We just want to remember what that felt like." "Don't listen to it," I told Tim. But it was hard not to listen when another figure stepped forward wearing my own face, speaking with my own voice. "I know what it's like to carry the dead inside you, Jake. All those soldiers you couldn't save in Vietnam, all that guilt eating away at you. We can take that pain. We can make it stop." For a moment, I almost stepped forward. The promise of emptiness, of no more nightmares, no more guilt over the men who died while I lived. It was tempting. Then I remembered what Ruth had said. They want to feel alive again. These things weren't offering peace. They were offering the kind of emptiness that would leave me walking around forever, hungry for something I could never have. "The mine entrance," I said to Tim. "Can you see it?" He pointed through the circle of hollow men. About 30 yards away, barely visible in our flare light, was the opening I'd seen earlier, a black mouth in the hillside surrounded by those dead trees. "We make a run for it. Stay close. Keep a flare burning at all times." "This is insane," Tim muttered, but he gathered up the remaining flares. On 3. 1, 2, we ran. The hollow men moved to intercept us, but the flares drove them back. I heard their voices calling out, some in our own words, others in languages I didn't recognize, all of them pleading, promising, threatening. Tim stumbled once, and a hollow man lunged forward, but the flare light caught it full in the face and it recoiled with a sound like steam escaping. The mine entrance was older than I'd expected. The wooden supports were rotted and crumbling, and metal rails disappeared into absolute darkness. The air that came out of the tunnel was cold and tasted of stone and something else, something organic and wrong. "Jake, I don't think this is a good idea," Tim said, but he followed me into the tunnel anyway. Our footsteps echoed strangely in the narrow space. The flare light revealed tool marks on the walls, abandoned mining equipment, and scratch marks that definitely weren't made by pickaxes. We'd gone maybe 50 feet when we heard the first voice behind us. "Jake? Tim? Why did you leave us outside?" My own voice, calling from the T. Tunnel entrance. Then Tim's voice. "We just want to help. Come back." "Keep moving," I said. "Don't look back." The tunnel branched and split, creating a maze of passages that weren't on any modern mine map. We followed the main shaft, guided by fresh scratch marks on the walls and that persistent cold breeze. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Our flare light couldn't reach the ceiling, but it illuminated something that made my blood freeze. 23 alcoves were carved into the walls, each one containing what had once been a human being. The bodies were preserved by the cold and the mineral-rich air, dressed in the same mining clothes we'd seen on the hollow men above. But these were the originals, the actual miners who'd died in the cave-in. And in the center of the chamber sat one more figure, very much alive. "Samuel Brennan," I whispered. The old man looked up at us with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much pain. His beard was white as snow, his clothes hung in rags, but he was breathing, moving, undeniably alive after nearly a century underground. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice the same rough mountain accent we'd heard on the radio. "They're hunting you now. They can smell the life in you." "What happened here?" I asked. "What are those things up there?" Samuel laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the chamber walls. "We got hungry. That's what happened. Trapped down here with nothing to eat, nothing to drink. At first, we rationed what little we had. Then we started eating the dead. Then," he gestured to the alcoves, "then something came out of the deeper tunnels, something that fed on more than just flesh. It ate your souls," Tim said quietly. "Not ate, drained. Left us empty, but still walking around, still remembering what it felt like to be human, but never able to feel it again." Samuel's eyes fixed on me. I was the only one who didn't get completely drained. Just enough left in me to stay alive, to keep watch, to make sure they stayed down here where they belonged. "But they're not staying down here anymore," I said. Samuel nodded sadly. "I'm getting old, too old to keep them contained much longer. They've been testing the boundaries, trying to find ways to the surface, looking for fresh life to feed on." A sound echoed through the chamber, footsteps in the tunnel behind us. The hollow men had followed us down. "There's only one way to stop them," Samuel said, pointing to a pile of old mining explosives in the corner of the chamber. "Dynamite from the original excavation. Still good after all these years. But once those tunnels come down, there's no getting out." The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear our own voices calling from the darkness. "Jake, Tim, we know you're down there." I looked at the explosives, then at Tim, then at Samuel Brennan, who'd spent a century guarding something that should never have existed. "How long do we have?" I asked. 5 minutes once I light the fuses, maybe less." Tim grabbed my arm. "Jake, there has to be another way." But I was already moving toward the dynamite because I understood now. This was why I'd survived Vietnam when so many others hadn't. This was why I'd become a ranger, why I'd devoted my life to saving people in these mountains, this moment, this choice. "Light it," I told Samuel. The old man smiled for the first time since we'd found him. "It's been a long time since I've seen someone willing to make the hard choice." He struck a match and began lighting fuses. The explosion tore through Whisper Ridge like the mountain itself was screaming. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed in Knoxville, missing my left arm and most of my memory of how I'd gotten out of those mines. The official report said there'd been a geological instability, a cave-in during a rescue attempt. Park Ranger Tim Hughes was listed as missing, presumed, dead. But I remember Samuel Brennan pushing us toward a narrow side tunnel as the fuses burned down. I remember crawling through passages barely wide enough for a man, following a thin stream of air that might lead to the surface. I remember the sound of the hollow men screaming as the mountain came down on top of them. Not the empty wails of the soulless, but the anguished cries of men who finally realized what they'd lost. I remember Tim not making it out. The doctors said I was lucky, severe trauma, blood loss, exposure, but I'd survive. They didn't understand why I couldn't sleep underground, why I needed lights on at all times, why I'd wake up screaming about empty faces and voices that used to be human. The Park Service gave me a medical discharge and a pension. They sealed off the Whisper Ridge area, citing ongoing geological hazards. New warning signs went up, keeping hikers and campers away from the old mine sites. But I know the truth. I know what's really buried under those tons of rock and earth. 3 months after the accident, I transferred to a ranger station in Arizona. Desert country, where the earth is dry and open, where there are no deep places for things to hide. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The nightmares followed me west. Dreams of Tim calling my name from underground, of Samuel Brennan still standing guard over something that wouldn't stay buried. And sometimes, in the early hours before dawn, I'd get reports of missing hikers near old mine sites throughout the Appalachians. The pattern was always the same. Abandoned campsites with belongings arranged in circles. Impossible footprints leading into the forest. Equipment malfunctions and radio static that sounded like voices from the deep. I started keeping files, unofficial records of incidents that never made it into the Park Service reports. Contact informants. A TN for rangers who'd had encounters they couldn't explain. A network of people who understood that some things don't stay dead just because you bury them. Because here's what I learned in Tyr. Those tunnels under Whisper Ridge. The earth remembers. Every mine shaft, every cave-in, every place where men died hungry and afraid in the dark. The earth remembers, and sometimes it gives back what was taken from it. The Consolidated Coal Company didn't just operate in Tennessee. They had mines throughout Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. Anywhere there was coal in the ground and men desperate enough to dig for it. And in each of those places, the same stories persist. Workers who disappeared during accidents, mines that were sealed without explanation, local families who whisper warnings about certain hills and hollows where the ground itself feels wrong. I'm telling you this story now because the seismic monitors still pick up movement under Whisper Ridge. Small tremors, rhythmic and regular, like something trying to dig its way out. The explosion sealed the main chamber, but those tunnel systems run deeper than anyone knows. And every 13 years, right on schedule, people still go missing in the Smokies. Last month, I got a call from a young ranger stationed near my old post. Her name is Sarah Chen, and she'd found something that made my blood run cold. A family from Charlotte had reported being followed by wrong-looking people during a camping trip. Their abandoned campsite was discovered with belongings arranged in a perfect circle around a cold fire pit. The footprints leading away started human and gradually changed into something else. Something with fused toes and bone pushing through the soles. Sarah's radio had picked up old mountain music playing backward. Her compass pointed toward Whisper Ridge regardless of magnetic north. I'm driving back to Tennessee tomorrow. Not because I think I can stop what's coming. The Hollow Men have had over 40 years to find new ways to the surface. But because someone needs to bear witness. Someone needs to. Oh, remember that these mountains hold more than just trees and trails and scenic overlooks. They hold the hungry dead, and the hungry dead are patient. If you're planning to visit the Great Smokies, stay on the marked trails. Camp in designated areas. Don't follow voices in the forest, no matter how familiar they sound. And if you see figures watching you from the tree line, figures whose faces look empty even from a distance, don't try to approach them. Because some people who go into those mountains don't come back the same, and some don't come back at all. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a park ranger in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains for 12 years now. People trust me to keep their families safe when they come camping. I speak both English and Spanish, so I help a lot of different visitors. Out of all the missing kid cases I've worked on, I've brought 89% of them home safe. That's a record I'm proud of. I became a ranger after my nephew Carlos died in a hiking accident when he was just 7. My sister never forgave me for not being there to protect him. Now I have my own daughter, Sophia. She's 8 years old and loves to draw pictures of mountains and trees. Every morning before work, she makes me promise to come home safe. The Blue Ridge Mountains are beautiful, but they can be dangerous too. Families come here thinking it's like a city park, but these woods are wild and deep. Devil's Den is one of the most popular camping spots, but it sits right over a bunch of limestone caves. The rocks make weird echoes, and sounds carry in strange ways. In the summer of 1983, I started getting reports that didn't make sense. Parents would call the ranger station saying they had an extra kid with them during their camping trip. When I asked what they meant, they'd get confused and say something like, "Well, we brought 3 kids, but there were 4 around our campfire last night." At first I thought parents were just tired and not counting right. Camping with kids is hard work. You're watching them all day, making sure they don't wander off or fall into the creek. By nighttime, you're so worn out that maybe you don't notice your neighbor's kids sitting with your family. But then more families called with the same story. Always the same thing. An extra child would appear during their stay, usually around dinner time or when they were singing songs by the fire. The kids were always described the same way. Too pale, too quiet, with old-looking eyes, and they could sing better than any kid should be able to. Mrs. Henderson from Richmond was the first one to really worry me. She called on a Tuesday morning crying into the phone. "Ranger Santos, something's wrong with my daughter Emma. She keeps talking about the pale girl who taught her old songs at Devil's Den, but we were the only family there that night." I drove out to Devil's Den that afternoon to look around. The campground was empty except for some crows picking at leftover food. I walked the whole area, checking for footprints or anything unusual. That's when I found them. Small footprints in the mud near the creek. Child-sized, but they led straight to the cave entrance and just stopped. The caves at Devil's Den go deep into the mountain. We keep them blocked off because they're not safe for tourists. But these footprints went right up to the metal grate we put over the entrance. There was no way a kid could get through those bars. I called my supervisor and told him about the reports. He laughed and said parents see what they want to see. "Maria, you're looking for problems where there aren't any. Probably just other campers' kids playing together." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night I stayed late at the station, reading old reports about Devil's Den. Most of it was normal stuff. Lost hikers, bear sightings, the usual camping accidents. Then I found something from 1975 that made my skin crawl. A family from Norfolk had reported their 6-year-old son Tommy started speaking with a different voice after camping at Devil's Den. He would sing songs in a language they didn't recognize and talk about the children in the rocks who are so sad. The report was filed and forgotten. I kept reading and found more reports going back years. Different families, different kids, but always the same pattern. Children coming home from Devil's Den acting strange, talking about new friends who lived in the caves, singing songs that sounded like they came from 100 years ago. The last report I read was from 1978. A little girl named Susan had to be taken to a doctor because she wouldn't stop crying and asking for her mama in the white dress. Her parents said she'd never talked like that before their camping trip. I looked at the clock. It was almost midnight, but I couldn't stop reading. There was something in these woods, something that was drawn to children. And tomorrow, 3 more families were scheduled to camp at Devil's Den. I got to Devil's Den early the next morning before the campers arrived. I wanted to check the area one more time, maybe set up some cameras to see what was really happening. The morning mist was thick between the trees and everything felt too quiet. Even the birds weren't singing. The first family showed up around noon, the Johnsons from Virginia Beach. They had twin boys, maybe 5 years old, and a baby girl. Normal family, excited about their first camping trip in the mountains. I helped them set up their tent and gave them the usual safety talk about staying on marked trails and keeping food stored properly. "This is such a peaceful place," Mrs. Johnson said, bouncing her baby on her hip. "The boys are going to love it here." I wanted to tell her to pack up and leave, but what could I say? That some kids reported making imaginary friends? That I found footprints that didn't make sense? She'd think I was crazy. The second family arrived an hour later. The Garcias from Richmond. They had a daughter about Sophia's age and a teenage son who clearly didn't want to be there. The girl, Anna, reminded me so much of my own daughter that my chest got tight. She had the same bright smile and curious eyes. "Mr. Ranger Lady," Anna called to me, "are there really bears in these woods?" "Sometimes," I told her, "but they're more scared of you than you are of them. Just remember to stay close to your parents, okay?" The third family never showed up. I was almost relieved. That evening, I parked my truck at the top of the hill where I could watch both campsites without being seen. I brought binoculars and a thermos of coffee, planning to stay all night if I had to. Around 7 o'clock, both families started their campfires. The Johnson twins were running around, playing tag and laughing. Ana Garcia was helping her mom cook hot dogs. Everything looked normal and safe. Then, as the sun started to set, I heard it, singing. It was coming from the direction of the caves, but it sounded like children's voices. Clear and sweet, singing an old hymn I remembered from church when I was little. Amazing Grace, but slower and sadder than I'd ever heard it. Through my binoculars, I watched both campsites. The families had stopped what they were doing and were listening to the singing too. The little kids stood up and started walking toward the sound. "Ana, come back here," Mr. Garcia called. But Ana kept walking, like she was in a trance. The Johnson twins were doing the same thing, moving toward the tree line where the singing was coming from. That's when I saw her. A little girl in a white dress was standing at the edge of the woods. She looked maybe 9 years old, with long, dark hair and skin so pale it seemed to glow in the firelight. She was the one singing. I grabbed my radio to call for backup, but it just made static noise. The singing got louder, and more children appeared. First one, then another, until I counted 12 kids standing in the shadows between the trees. All of them pale, all of them singing in perfect harmony. The Johnson twins reached the pale children first. As soon as they got close, one of the ghost kids took each twin by the hand. Ana was right behind them. A little girl in a torn white dress knelt down to Ana's level and started singing directly to her. I ran down the aisle as fast as I could, but by the time I reached the campsite, all the children, living and dead, were gone. "Where are the kids?" I shouted at the parents. Mrs. Johnson looked confused. "Kids, our boys are right." She looked around the empty campsite. "They were just here. They were right here." Mr. Garcia was already grabbing flashlights. "Ana! Ana! Where are you?" We searched for 2 hours. I called in every available ranger and volunteer from 3 counties. We found the children just before midnight, sitting by the blocked cave entrance like they were waiting for something. The living kids, Ana and the twins, were fine physically, but they were different. "Who were you playing with?" I asked Ana while the paramedic checked her over. "The sad children," she said in a voice that sounded too old for her age. "They live in the singing rocks. They miss their mamas." One of the Johnson twins looked up at me with eyes that seemed to hold more than a 5-year-old should know. The lady in the white dress said we could stay and play forever if we wanted, but we told her we had to go home. The paramedics said all 3 kids were healthy, just cold and tired. But their parents took them to the hospital anyway. I didn't blame them. I stayed at Devil's Den all night, walking the perimeter and thinking. The cave entrance showed fresh scratches in the metal grating, like small fingers had been trying to open it from the inside. When I shined my flashlight through the bars, I could swear I heard whispering coming from deep in the darkness. Something was very wrong at Devil's Den. And tomorrow, more families were coming. I spent the next morning at the county library looking through old newspapers and records. I had to know what was in those caves and why it was calling to children. What I found made me wish I'd never started looking. In 1887, a train carrying orphaned children crashed in the gorge near Devil's Den. It was called an orphan train. They used to put kids with no parents on trains and send them west to work on farms. 12 children died in Poole. The crash, trapped in a rail car that fell into the gorge during a storm. The newspaper article said rescue workers could hear the children singing hymns for 3 days while they tried to dig them out. By the time they reached the wreckage, all 12 were dead. Their bodies were buried in a small cemetery that was later moved when they built the park. But according to the train conductor's journal, which was donated to the library in 1960, those children never stopped singing. Day and night we hear their voices echoing up from the gorge, he wrote. Sweet voices singing Amazing Grace and Rock of Ages. Even after we know they've passed on, we still hear them calling for their mothers. I drove back to Devil's Den with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The children in the caves weren't just spirits. They were lost souls, trapped by their own sadness and fear, and they wanted living children to keep them company. That afternoon, the Martinez family arrived for a weekend camping trip. They had 2 kids, a boy named Diego, who was about 10, and a little girl named Carmen, who couldn't have been more than 4. Carmen reminded me so much of Sophia that I almost called the family and told them to leave immediately. Instead, I decided to camp there myself, right next to their site. If something happened, I'd be ready. As evening came, I helped the Martinez family get their fire started. Carmen was shy but curious, asking me about the animals in the forest and whether fairies lived in the trees. "Do you hear that?" she asked suddenly, tilting her head to one side. I listened, but all I heard were normal forest sounds: wind in the trees, a creek babbling somewhere nearby, an owl calling in the distance. "Hear what, sweetheart?" "The singing," she said. "Pretty singing, like in church." My blood went cold. The sun was still up, but I could see the Martinez parents looking around nervously. "I don't hear any singing," Mr. Martinez said, but his wife was already standing up. That's when I heard it too. Faint at first, like it was coming from very far away, but getting stronger. Children's voices singing in harmony. The same hymn as before, but sadder. Much sadder. "Carmen, come away from there," Mrs. Martinez called. But Carmen was already walking toward the tree line, following the sound. Diego was right behind her, his eyes wide, but his feet moving on their own. "Stop!" I yelled, running after them. The ghost children appeared all at once, like someone had turned on a light in the darkness. 12 pale figures in old-fashioned clothes, some in dresses, some in knickers and suspenders. They formed a circle around Diego and Carmen, still singing, holding out their hands. I reached the children just as Diego took the hand of a pale boy about his age. The ghost boy's touch left frost on Diego's skin, but Diego didn't seem to notice. He just smiled and started walking toward the cave entrance. "No!" I grabbed Diego's other hand and pulled. The ghost boy turned to look at me, and I saw eyes that held more sadness than any child should ever feel. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "Let them play with us," he said. "We've been alone for so long." Carmen had taken the hand of a little ghost girl in a torn white dress. The ghost girl was maybe 6 years old, with long blonde hair that seemed to float around her face. "I want to go home," the ghost girl whispered to Carmen. "I want my mama. Will you help me find my mama?" Carmen nodded seriously, like this was the most important job anyone had ever given her. I pulled both living children back toward the campsite, but the ghost children followed us. They didn't walk. They glided just above the ground, their feet never quite touching the earth. "Mrs. Martinez, get to your car," I shouted. "Now!" But Mrs. Martinez was staring at the ghost children with a strange expression on her face. "They're so young," she whispered. "They're just babies." He ghost children began to sing louder, and their voices seemed to wrap around us like invisible ropes. I felt my grip on Diego and Carmen getting weaker. The song was beautiful and heartbreaking, and part of me wanted to let go, to let these poor dead children have some friends to play with. Then I thought about Sophia, waiting for me at home, about all the families who trusted me to keep their children safe. I pulled out my radio and turned it to the emergency channel, even though I knew it wouldn't work properly here. Instead of static, though, the radio picked up voices. Children's voices, but not the ones standing in front of us. "Help us," came a whisper through the speaker. "Please help us go home." The ghost children stopped singing and stared at the radio. The little girl holding Carmen's hand started to cry, though no tears came. "We want to go home," she said, "but we don't know how." That's when I understood. These weren't evil spirits trying to hurt living children. They were lost kids, scared and alone, who had been trapped for almost a century. They didn't want to take Diego and Carmen away. They just wanted someone to help them find peace. But understanding didn't make them any less dangerous. Good intentions or not, they were still trying to lure living children into the caves where they had died. I had to find a way to help both the living and the dead before someone got hurt. I got the Martinez family safely to their car and told them to drive straight home. Diego kept looking back at the ghost children, who were still standing at the edge of the trees, watching us leave. The sad boy wanted me to sing with him, Diego told his parents. He said his name was Thomas, and he's been waiting for a friend for a really long time." Carmen was crying in her mother's arms. "The pretty girl is lost. She can't find her mama. I wanted to help her. I promised this, E.I. Martinez family. I would take care of everything, though I had no idea how. As soon as they drove away, I called the only person I could think of who might understand what we were dealing with. Father Rodriguez had been the priest at St. Maria's Church for 30 years. He'd heard every confession and seen every kind of trouble the human heart could create. More importantly, my grandmother had always said he was a man who understood the world beyond what we could see. "Maria," he said when he answered his phone, "what's troubling you, child?" I told him everything. The reports, the sightings, the ghost children, and what I'd learned about the train crash. When I finished, there was a long silence. "These spirits are trapped by their own pain," he finally said. "They died afraid and alone, calling for their mothers. Until they find peace with their death, they'll keep reaching out to living children for comfort." "How do I help them?" "Very carefully, and not alone. I'll meet you at Devil's Den tomorrow night with everything we need." The next day I researched everything I could about the 12 children who died in the train crash. Their names, their ages, where they came from. Most were between 6 and 12 years old, orphans from cities back east being sent to farms in the west. Mary Catherine O'Sullivan, age 9, from Boston. Her parents died of fever. Thomas Miller, age 8, from New York. Found living on the streets. Sarah Jane Crawford, age 6, from Philadelphia. Parents died in a factory accident. 12 names. 12 children who never got the chance to grow up. Father Rodriguez arrived just as the sun was setting, carrying a leather bag and wearing his formal black clothes. With him was Mrs. Elena Vasquez, an old woman from town who knew more about spirits and folk magic than anyone I'd ever met. "You sure about this, Maria?" Mrs. Vasquez asked. "Sometimes it's better to leave sleeping ghosts alone." "They're not sleeping," I said. "They're suffering, and they're putting living children at risk." We walked to the cave entrance together. I had Ma'at, I flashlight and radio. Father Rodriguez had his Bible and a small bottle of blessed water. Mrs. Vasquez carried herbs and candles and things I didn't recognize. As soon as we got close to the caves, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Our breath came out in white puffs and frost started forming on the metal grating. Then we heard them singing. All 12 voices, harmonizing in perfect pitch, singing Rock of Ages like it was a funeral hymn. The sound echoed off the cave walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Show yourselves," Father Rodriguez called out. "We've come to help." The ghost children appeared one by one, stepping out of the rock walls like they were made of mist. They looked exactly like living kids, except for their pale skin and old-fashioned clothes. But their eyes held almost a century of loneliness and fear. Mary Catherine O'Sullivan stepped forward. She was the little girl in the white dress, the one who had tried to take Ana Garcia's hand. "Are you here to take us away?" she asked in a voice like wind through autumn leaves. "We're here to help you go home," I said. "But we are home," said Thomas Miller, the boy who had wanted to be Diego's friend. "We've lived in the Singing Rocks for so long. Where else would we go?" Mrs. Vasquez lit her candles and arranged them in a circle. "You children died almost 100 years ago. You're not supposed to still be here." "We died calling for our mothers," Mary Catherine said, and now I could see tears on her pale cheeks. "We died scared and alone in the dark. We kept singing because we thought someone would come save us." "Someone did come," Father Rodriguez said gently. "Just too late to save your bodies. But it's not too late to save your souls." The ghost children moved closer, drawn by the warm light of the candles. As they came into the circle, they looked less like pale spirits and more like the scared kids they really were. "We don't want to be alone anymore," whispered Sarah Jane Crawford, the littlest one. "When the warm children come camping, we just want to play. We don't mean to scare them." "I know," I said, "but you can't stay here forever. Your families are waiting for you on the other side." "Our families are dead too," Thomas said. "We don't have anywhere to go." Mrs. Vasquez began to chant in Spanish, words I didn't understand, but that made the air feel warmer. The ghost children looked less solid now, like they were fading. "No," Mary Catherine cried. "Please don't make us disappear. We'll be alone in the dark again." "You won't be alone," Father Rodriguez said. "And you won't be in the dark. There's light waiting for you, and love, and all the peace you've been searching for." He opened his Bible and began to read a prayer for the dead. Mrs. Vasquez kept chanting. I just stood there, watching 12 ghost children face the thing they'd been running from for almost a century, letting go. One by one, they began to glow with soft, warm light. The fear in their eyes was replaced by something like hope. "Will it hurt?" Sarah Jane asked. "No, sweetheart," I said. "It's just like going to sleep, except you'll wake up where you belong." Mary Catherine looked at me with those ancient eyes in her young face. "Will you tell the warm children we're sorry? We never wanted to scare them." "I will." The ghost children joined hands in a circle around our candles. They began to sing one last time. Not a sad hymn, but a lullaby. As they sang, they grew brighter and brighter, until they were too bright to look at directly. When the light faded, they were gone. The caves were silent for the first time in almost a century. The official report said the incident at Devil's Den was caused by natural cave acoustics, creating auditory hallucinations that triggered group hysteria among campers. The Park Service put up better lighting around the cave area and installed new safety barriers. I never told anyone what really happened that night. Who would believe me? But the families who had encountered the ghost children, they knew. The Martinez family sent me a Christmas card every year, and Diego always included a drawing of the sad boy who wanted to be his friend. The Garcias moved away, but Anna's mother called me once to say that Anna still sometimes sang the old hymns the ghost girl had taught her, but she didn't seem scared anymore. "It's like she's singing for someone who's finally at peace," Mrs. Garcia said. I kept working at Devil's Den, watching over the families who came to camp. The strange reports stopped completely. No more extra children, no more midnight singing, no more kids going home with old songs and ancient eyes. But I started noticing things I'd missed before. Other parks, other places where children had died tragically, other rangers dealing with cases they couldn't explain and incidents they couldn't put in official reports. I began keeping my own files, learning everything I could about helping lost spirits find peace. Sometimes that meant research and ritual, like with the singing children. Sometimes it just meant listening and understanding what the dead needed to let go. My daughter Sophia is in high school now, and she knows what her mama really does for work. Not just protecting living visitors, but helping dead ones too. She's proud of me, which means everything. Last month, a ranger from Yellowstone called me about some strange reports involving children who disappeared during a blizzard in 1952. The cases were getting active again, and families were starting to report extra kids appearing at their campsites. "I heard you might know how to handle something like this," he said. I looked at the photo on my desk. Sophia at her high school graduation, smiling and healthy and alive. Then I looked at my filing cabinet, full of stories about children who never got the chance to graduate, to grow up, to find peace. "I'll be there next week," I told him. Some people think the dead should stay buried and the past should stay in the past. But I've learned that sometimes the dead need help just as much as the living do. And sometimes helping them is the only way to keep everyone safe. The Blue Ridge Mountains are still beautiful and still dangerous. Families still come to Devil's Den to camp and make memories. But now they can do it without the ghost children calling to their kids from the caves. Because sometimes the job of protecting people means helping everyone, even the ones who died a long time ago, find their way home. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a park ranger for over 30 years now. I've learned that the most important part of my job isn't just watching the living. It's helping the dead rest in peace. And that makes all the difference in the world. My name is Thomas Fletcher, and I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 18 years. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Army Rangers, learning how to survive when the world tried to kill you. I thought I knew everything about staying alive in the woods. I was wrong. Growing up in these West Virginia mountains, I learned tracking from my Cherokee grandfather. He'd take me out before dawn, teaching me to read animal signs like a book. "The forest talks," he'd say, pointing to broken twigs and pressed leaves. "You just have to listen." But he also told me other stories. Stories about bone dogs that hunted bad people in sacred places. Spirit guardians that punished those who took too much from the earth. I never believed those tales. They were just old superstitions, right? That was October 1988. The leaves were turning gold and red when Sheriff Morrison called me about 3 dead hunters up near Raven's Roost. "You need to see this, Tom," he said over the radio. His voice sounded shaky. "It ain't like anything I've seen before." I drove my Jeep as far as the old logging road would take me, then hiked the last 2 miles on foot. The forest felt wrong that morning, too quiet. Even the squirrels weren't chattering. My German Shepherd, Rex, whined and pulled back on his leash as we got closer to the site. I found Sheriff Morrison and Deputy Hayes standing next to 3 piles of clothing. That's all they were now, just empty hunting jackets, pants, and boots, arranged like scarecrows that had lost their stuffing. "Where are the bodies?" I asked. Morrison pointed down. "That's all that's left." Inside each pile of clothes, I saw organs, hearts, lungs, liver, everything soft and wet. But no bones. Not a single bone anywhere. "How does something take just the bones?" Hayes asked. His face was green. "How do you pull out a skeleton without cutting the skin?" I knelt down and looked closer. The clothes weren't torn, no bite marks, no blood on the fabric. It was like someone had reached inside and pulled out every bone from skull to toe, leaving everything else behind. "Animals?" Morrison suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. I shook my head. "What kind of animal sorts organs from bones? And look at this." I pointed around the clearing. Hundreds of animal bones, deer, rabbit, squirrel, all arranged in perfect circles around each body. The bone spirals were beautiful in a horrible way. Each circle was maybe 10 feet across, with tiny bones making intricate patterns, like some kind of ritual. I pulled out my compass to mark our location. The needle spun wildly, never settling on north. My radio crackled with static. Even my GPS showed our coordinates as undefined. "Tom," Morrison said quietly, "you ever see anything like this before?" I had to tell him no. But standing there in that silent clearing with those perfect bone circles and empty clothes, I remembered my grandfather's voice. "The forest protects its own, Tommy. Some places are sacred. Some spirits don't forgive." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 3 hunters. I'd seen their names on poaching reports over the years. Jim Hartley, caught with endangered bird eggs. Mike Stevens, found with more deer than his tags allowed. Bob Reynolds, who'd been selling black bear parts to collectors. Maybe the forest really was protecting itself. The next morning I went back to Raven's Roost alone. Rex refused to come this time, hiding under the porch when I called him. Smart dog. I wanted to examine the scene in daylight without Morrison and Hayes stomping around. Rangers learned to read the woods like a crime scene, and something important was hiding in those details. The bone circles were still perfect. Not even the wind had moved them. But as I studied the patterns, I noticed something new. Fresh paw prints leading away from each circle. Prints that looked wrong. I've tracked every animal in these mountains. Bear, wolf, coyote, mountain lion. These prints looked like dog paws, but they were pressed too deep into the earth, like they were made of something heavier than flesh. The tracks led toward the old cave system near Cherokee Falls. My grandfather had always warned me away from those caves. "Bad place," he'd say, "where the angry dead sleep." As I followed the trail, my equipment started acting up again. My metal detector screamed like it was finding buried treasure everywhere. The temperature dropped 20 degrees between one step and the next. My breath came out in white puffs, even though it was nearly 60 degrees. That's when I heard the clicking. It sounded like castanets or maybe bones tapping together in rhythm. Click, 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 coming from deeper in the woods, moving parallel to my path. I stopped walking. The clicking stopped too. I took 3 steps forward. Click, click, click. Something was pacing me, staying just out of sight in the thick trees. I pulled out my binoculars and scanned the forest. For just a second, I saw something white moving between the pines. Too white for an animal, too tall for a dog. "Hello?" I called out. The forest went dead silent. Even the wind stopped. Then I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. Howling, but not like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. This was hollow, echoing, like someone howling down a well. And there were multiple voices, maybe 6 or 7, all howling together. The sound came from the direction of the caves. I should have left right then. Should have hiked back to my Jeep and called for backup. Instead, I kept following those impossible paw prints. Something was drawing me forward, like a fish on a line. The prints led to a narrow entrance in the rock face, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The cave mouth was surrounded by more bone arrangements, these ones bigger and more complex. Skull is from dozens of animals arranged like sentries, rib bones woven together like basket work, leg bones stacked like cordwood. All of them were bleached white as fresh snow. The howling started again, coming from deep inside the cave. My flashlight beam showed a tunnel stretching back into darkness. The walls were covered with more bones, pressed into the rock like they'd grown there. I was 20 feet inside when I saw the first skeleton. It was sitting upright against the cave wall, still wearing scraps of a hunting jacket. Human bones, but arranged wrong somehow. The skull was turned backward. The rib cage was upside down. The arm bones were twisted into impossible shapes. "Jesus," I whispered. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing there, but I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. Slow, deep breaths that echoed off the cave walls. A voice spoke from the darkness. Not words exactly, but meaning that went straight into my head. "You don't belong here." I ran. I didn't go back to the caves for 3 days. Told myself I needed time to think, to plan a proper investigation. Truth was, I was scared. 18 years in these woods, 8 years in combat zones, and I'd never felt fear like that before. On the 4th day, Sheriff Morrison called again. "Tom, we got another problem. Family of 5 went missing near Raven's Roost. City folks from Pittsburgh here for hunting season." My blood went cold. "When?" "Yesterday evening. Their camp's still set up, but no sign of them. You know those woods better than anyone." I knew all right. I knew exactly what had happened to them. I met Morrison at the family's campsite that afternoon. 5 tents arranged in a neat circle. Camping gear still laid out. Food still on the picnic table. No signs of struggle. But there were those bone-deep paw prints everywhere. Dozens of them. Circling the camp like wolves around prey. "Look at this," Morrison said, pointing to something near the fire pit. More bone spirals. 5 of them this time, each about 15 feet across. But these were different. These were made from human bones. I knelt down and examined them closer. Finger bones arranged like flower petals. Leg bones making perfect geometric patterns. Skulls placed at precise intervals around each circle. "Are those—" Morrison started. "Yeah," I said. "They are." The 5 missing people were right there in front of us, arranged in careful spirals like art pieces. No flesh, no blood, no torn clothing, just bones placed with mathematical precision. That's when I noticed the 6th spiral. This one was empty, but the bone pattern was already started, waiting for someone. "Tom," Morrison whispered. "Look." At the edge of the clearing, 7 white shapes moved between the trees. They looked like dogs, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, and they glowed with a soft, phosphorescent light that hurt to look at directly. The shapes circled us, staying just far enough away to remain partially hidden. But I could see their eyes, blue flames burning in empty sockets. One of them stepped into the open. It was a dog skeleton, held together by nothing but malevolent will. Its bones were polished white as teeth. When it moved, its joints clicked together like castanets, the same sound I'd been hearing in the woods. The creature tilted its head and looked right at me, not at Morrison, at me specifically. "You came back," the voice said in my head. "Good." "Tom," Morrison whispered urgently, "what the hell is that thing?" I couldn't answer. The skeleton dog was walking toward us, and 6 more were emerging from the trees. They formed a circle around us, moving with perfect coordination. The alpha, the one that had spoken, stopped 5 feet away. This close, I could see that some of its bones weren't dog bones at all. Human finger bones woven between its ribs. What looked like a child's skull attached to its shoulder blade. "You know what we are," it said. "Boo. Your grandfather told you the stories." "Bone dogs," I whispered. Morrison stared at me. "What?" "We are justice," the creature continued. "We are the price of disrespect. We are what happens when men take too much from the sacred earth." The other 6 skeletons began to pace around us in a tightening circle. Their bones clicked together in a hypnotic rhythm. With each step, they left those deep paw prints in the ground. "These people," the alpha gestured toward the bone spirals with what might have once been a paw. "They killed without honor. Took more than they needed. Wasted what they killed. The forest called us to collect their debt." "That's not how law works," Morrison said, his voice shaking. "People deserve trials. Due process." The creature's hollow eye sockets flared brighter blue. "Your laws mean nothing here. This is sacred ground, marked with the bones of our ancestors. Cherokee law rules here. Old law. Blood law." That's when I understood. These weren't just random spirits. They were guardians, created to protect this specific place. The cave system must be built on a Cherokee burial ground. "You understand?" the alpha said, reading my thoughts. "Your blood remembers what your mind forgot." "My grandfather," I said. "Wise man. He made the old agreements, kept the old ways. But he is gone now. The forest needs a new guardian." The circle of skeleton dogs stopped pacing. All 7 turned to look at me. "The choice is yours, Thomas Fletcher. Join us willingly, or join us like they did." It gestured toward the bone spirals. Morrison grabbed my arm. "Tom, we need to get out of here. Call for backup. Get the National Guard." But I was remembering my grandfather's stories more clearly now. The bone dogs didn't hunt randomly. They came for people who violated the natural order. Poachers, wasteful hunters, those who killed for sport instead of need. Morrison was a good man. But he'd never learned the old ways, never learned to respect the balance. The empty 6th spiral was for him. "Morrison," I said carefully, "I need you to think about every animal you've killed in these mountains, every deer, every rabbit. Did you use all the meat? Did you thank the animal's spirit? Did you take only what you needed?" He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Tom, what the hell are you talking about? They're just animals. God put them here for us to use." The skeleton dog's eye flames burned brighter. Several of them began to growl, a sound like wind through a graveyard. "He does not understand," the alpha said. "He cannot learn. He must join the collection." "No," I said quickly. "He's a good man, just ignorant. Give me a chance to teach him." The creature tilted its skull. "You would vouch for him? Take responsibility for his education?" I looked at Morrison, who was staring at the skeleton dogs with growing terror. He was a decent sheriff, a family man with 2 kids. But he'd been raised to see nature as something to conquer, not something to respect. "I vouch for him," I said. "Then you accept the guardian role. You will enforce the old laws. Keep the balance between your people and ours. The weight of the decision crashed down on me. My grandfather had carried this burden his whole life. Now it was my turn. "What does it mean?" I asked. The alpha stepped closer. Its bone paws left deep prints in the soft earth. "You become our eyes in the world of the living. You watch for those who take too much. You warn them when possible. When warnings fail, you call us. And if I refuse, then you join the spirals, and we find another guardian among your people." I thought about my wife, my kids. What would happen to them if these things decided they needed to be corrected too? What would happen to all the innocent people who used these woods if there was no one to mediate between the living and the dead? "I accept," I said. The moment I spoke the words, everything changed. The world suddenly felt bigger, more complex. I could sense every living thing in the forest. Deer browsing near the creek, squirrels gathering nuts, even the earthworms working through the soil. But I could also sense the dead, all the animals that had died in these woods, their spirits watching from the shadows. The alpha reached out with one skeletal paw and touched my forehead. Pain shot through my skull like lightning, and then visions flooded my mind. I saw these woods as they were 200 years ago, when Cherokee hunters moved through them with reverence. I saw the Civil War soldiers who'd camped here, cutting trees and polluting streams. I saw the first white settlers hunting buffalo to extinction, shooting passenger pigeons out of the sky for sport. I saw my grandfather as a young man, making the same choice I was making now, taking on the burden of keeping the peace between worlds. "You see," the alpha said, "you understand. The old ways are not dead. They sleep, waiting for those wise enough to wake them." When the visions ended, I was changed. I could feel the forest's pain when an animal died wastefully. I could sense the guilt in a person's heart when they violated natural law. And I could call the bone dogs with just a thought. Morrison was staring at me. "Tom, your eyes, they're different." I looked at my reflection in his badge. My pupils had turned ice blue, just like the skeleton dog's flames. "Welcome, Guardian," the alpha said. "Your first test comes soon." It lifted its skull toward the trail that led back to the main road. I could sense them now, 3 men hiking toward us, their hearts full of greed and disrespect, poachers coming to hunt in the sacred grove. "Tom," Morrison whispered, "what's happening to you?" "I'm becoming what I need to be," I said. The bone dogs were already melting back into the shadows, waiting for my call. "Go home, Sheriff. Forget what you saw here. And remember it. So only take what you need. Only kill what you'll use. The forest is watching now." He backed away from me, fear clear on his face, but he left. And when the poachers arrived an hour later, I tried to warn them. They laughed at me. They shouldn't have done that. That was 37 years ago. I'm 58 now, still working as a ranger in the Monongahela. Still married to Sarah, though she knows there's something different about me. My kids are grown, with children of their own. My son Michael shows promise. He's learning to listen to the forest like his great-grandfather did. The bone dogs still patrol these woods. They're stronger now than they were in 1988. More animals die disrespectfully each year. Trophy hunters who take only the heads. Poachers selling parts to collectors. People who hunt with no understanding of what they're taking from the world. Each wasteful death feeds the pack. They collect the bones of the dishonored animals, weaving them into their own bodies. What started as 7 skeleton dogs has grown to nearly 20. I do my best to intercede when I can. Sometimes a warning is enough. A talk about the old ways, about respect and balance. Many hunters listen. They change their practices, take only what they need, use every part of what they kill. Others don't listen. Their bones join the spirals in the cave near Cherokee Falls. Morrison retired 5 years ago, never spoke publicly about what he saw, but he stopped hunting entirely, started volunteering for wildlife conservation groups. Sometimes he calls me late at night asking if they are still out there. I tell him they are. The truth is, the bone dogs aren't just in these woods anymore. As disrespect for nature has spread, so have they. I've made contact with other guardians, People like me who've accepted the bargain, who work to keep the balance. We're scattered across the country now, from the Pacific Northwest to the Florida Everglades. Each of us watches. Each of us tries to teach the old ways. And when teaching fails. Last month, a group of college kids came through on a hunting adventure. They'd booked a guided trip to bag their first deer. When I found them, they'd shot 6 does and left the meat to rot, just wanted photos with the antlers. I tried to explain, tried to teach them why this was wrong. They told me to mind my own business. I pulled out the bone whistle the alpha had given me, carved from the femur of the very first poacher the pack had claimed. One sharp note, echoing through the trees. The bone dogs came running. The kids' bones are in the cave now, arranged in perfect spirals next to dozens of others. Their families think they got lost in the woods, died of exposure. The official report lists them as victims of natural predation. In a way, that's exactly what they were. Tonight, I'm training my son to use the whistle, teaching him the Cherokee words for respect and balance, preparing him for the day when he'll have to make the same choice I did. The old laws aren't dead. They're just sleeping, waiting in the spaces between civilization and wilderness. Waiting for the moment when humanity forgets that we're part of nature, not its masters. When that moment comes, and it's coming soon, the bone dogs will be ready. The forest protects its own, and we are its guardians. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I've been a park ranger for 10 years now. When I first got the job at Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, I was the first Hispanic woman to wear the uniform here. People stared at me a lot back then. Some weren't too happy about it either. But I knew these mountains and forests better than most folks who'd lived here their whole lives. I grew up in a family that moved around a lot. My dad worked construction, and we followed the jobs from Texas to Tennessee. My grandmother, Abuela Rosa, came with us everywhere. She was a tiny woman with hands like leather and eyes that seemed to see everything. She told the best stories, especially the scary ones about La Llorona, the crying woman who drowned her children and now steals other people's kids by rivers and creeks. "Mija," she would say to me in her mix of Spanish and English, "you listen to the old stories. They teach you things, keep you safe." I loved those tales, but I never thought they were real, just grandmother stories to keep kids from playing too close to the water. But working as a ranger changed how I thought about a lot of things. My job was pretty normal most days. I'd patrol the trails, help lost hikers, check campsites, and make sure people followed the rules. The Park Service liked having me around because I could talk to the Spanish-speaking families who came to visit. There were more of them every year, and most of the other rangers didn't speak Spanish. Willow Creek was one of my favorite spots to patrol. It ran through a pretty valley with big oak trees and willows hanging over the water. The creek was shallow, maybe 2 or 3 feet deep at the most. Perfect for kids to splash around in while their parents had picnics. Families loved it there, especially during the hot summer months. That's why what started happening in the summer of 1991 made no sense at all, though. First time was in June. The Morales family, no relation to my story later, just a common name, had driven up from Atlanta for a weekend camping trip. They had 3 kids, twin boys who were about 8 and a little girl named Carmen who was 5. Mrs. Morales was sitting on a blanket maybe 20 feet from the creek, watching all 3 kids play in the water. Her husband was getting firewood. The sun was bright, the water was clear, and everything seemed perfect. Then Carmen just walked deeper into the creek and lay down face first in the water. Mrs. Morales said she saw it happen but couldn't move fast enough to stop it, like she was stuck in slow motion or something. By the time she got to Carmen, the little girl was already drowned, in 2 feet of water, in broad daylight, with her mom watching. The county medical examiner said it was the strangest thing he'd ever seen. Carmen had drowned, but there wasn't any water in her lungs, like she had just stopped breathing while underwater. Everyone figured it was some kind of weird accident. These things happen sometimes, right? Kids do strange things. But then it happened again and again. By the end of July, 3 children had died in Willow Creek the exact same way. All Hispanic families. All during the day with parents nearby. All in shallow water. All with no water found in their lungs during the autopsy. That's when people started talking about La Llorona. The first person to say the name out loud was Mrs. Ramirez. She had been at the creek the day the second child died, a boy named Miguel Santos. She was there with her own family when it happened, maybe 50 yards upstream. She came to my ranger station a week later, wringing her hands and looking scared. "Señorita Elena," she said in Spanish, "you need to know something. I heard her crying before that boy died." "Heard who crying?" I asked, though something and cold was already moving up my spine. "La Llorona, the crying woman. I heard her voice by the water calling for her children. And then that little boy, he just walked into the creek like someone was calling him." Mrs. Ramirez wasn't crazy. She was a smart woman, a teacher back in Mexico City before her family moved to Tennessee. But she looked at me with eyes full of fear and said, "She's here now, in our creek, looking for children to replace the ones she lost." I tried to calm her down, told her it was just a terrible coincidence. But more families started coming to me with similar stories. They'd been at Willow Creek when one of the deaths happened, or they'd visited right before. And they all said the same thing. They heard a woman crying somewhere near the water. "It's not like normal crying," said Mr. Gutierrez, whose family had been camping there the weekend before Miguel Santos died. "It's, how do you say, desperate. Like someone whose heart is completely broken. And it makes you want to help, you know? Makes the children want to help." The Latino community in our area was small but tight. Word spread fast. By August, Hispanic families had stopped coming to Willow Creek entirely. They told their friends, their relatives, their co-workers, "Stay away from that place. La Llorona is there." I had to do something. It was my job to keep people safe in the park, and if families were too scared to visit because of some ghost story, I needed to figure out what was really going on. So I started doing research. The Cherokee National Forest records went back to the 1930s when the park was established, but the land had been settled long before that. I drove to the county courthouse and started digging through old records, maps, and newspapers. What I found made my hands shake. In 1847, a Mexican family named Morales had a land grant in the valley where Willow Creek runs now. The father, Diego Morales, had married a woman named Esperanza. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. During a flash flood in the spring of 1848, all 3 children were swept away by the swollen creek. Their bodies were never found. Diego searched for weeks, but the water had carried them too far downstream. Esperanza lost her mind with grief. According to the old newspaper reports, she would spend entire days and nights by the creek, calling for her children. Neighbors said they could hear her crying from miles away. She would wade into the water, searching, always searching for her babies. The winter of 1848 was brutal. Diego found Esperanza's body in the creek in February, frozen in the ice. But here's the strange part. She was found upstream from where she'd entered the water. The current should have carried her downstream, but somehow she ended up flowing against the natural direction of the creek. The newspaper called it a mystery of grief and desperation. I sat in my truck outside the courthouse for a long time after reading that, thinking about my grandmother's stories. About how La Llorona was always a mother who had lost her children, always crying by the water, always looking for kids to replace the ones she'd lost. But I still didn't believe it. Not really. That changed the next weekend. I was doing my evening patrol on Saturday, driving the service road that runs along Willow Creek. The sun was setting, and most of the day visitors had gone home. It was peaceful, quiet, except for the sound of water running over rocks and birds settling down for the night. Then I heard it. Crying. A woman crying like her heart was broken into a million pieces. I stopped my truck and got out, listening hard. The sound was coming from downstream, around a bend where the willows grew thick. I grabbed my flashlight and my radio and walked toward the sound. As I got closer, the crying got louder. But it wasn't just sad, it was desperate, hopeless, like someone who had been crying for 100 years and couldn't stop. I pushed through. The the willow branches and stepped onto the muddy bank of the creek. Nobody was there, but there were wet footprints in the mud, small footprints like a woman's bare feet. They led right to the edge of the water, and then just stopped. I shined my flashlight across the creek, up and down the banks. Nothing. But the crying continued for another minute, getting fainter and fainter like someone walking away through the water. Then it stopped completely, and the forest was quiet again. I stood there for a long time, looking at those footprints. They were real, fresh, but there was no way for someone to just vanish like that. Unless... I called my grandmother that night. "Abuela," I said when she answered the phone. "Tell me everything you know about La Llorona." There was a long pause. "Mija, why do you want to know about such things?" I told her everything. The dead children, the crying, the footprints. When I finished, she was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Abuela, are you there?" "Sí, mija, I'm here. Listen to me very carefully. This is not just a story anymore. You have a real Llorona there, and she is very dangerous." My grandmother told me things that night that she'd never shared before. About how La Llorona wasn't just one ghost, but a type of spirit that could happen anywhere a mother lost her children to water. About how the spirit becomes confused, thinking that other people's children are her own babies returned to her. "She doesn't mean to hurt them," Abuela Rosa explained. "In her mind, she's saving them, bringing them home. But she's been dead so long she doesn't remember that her home is underwater now." "How do you stop her?" I asked. "That's the hard part, mija. You can't fight her with guns or handcuffs like the bad men you arrest. She's made of grief and love twisted into something terrible. The only way to help her is to help her understand what really happened to her children." But before I could help anyone, La Llorona took another child. The Herrera family was camping at Willow Creek on Sunday morning. Despite all the warnings in the Latino community, some families still came. Maybe they thought the stories were exaggerated, or maybe they figured it wouldn't happen to them. 7-year-old Rosa Herrera was playing by the creek with her older brother when her parents heard the crying. Mrs. Herrera told me later that the sound made her feel incredibly sad, like someone she loved had died. But it also made her feel like she needed to help whoever was making that terrible noise. "I wanted to find her," Mrs. Herrera said. "The woman who was crying. I wanted to help her find whatever she had lost." Rosa felt it even stronger. She told her brother, "The sad lady needs help finding her babies." Then she walked into the creek and lay down in the water, just like the others. This time, I was only 5 minutes away when it happened. I got there while the paramedics were still trying to save Rosa, though we all knew it was too late. But I saw something nobody else saw. While everyone was focused on Rosa, I looked upstream toward where the crying had been coming from. And I saw her. She was standing in the creek about 30 yards away, half hidden by the hanging willow branches. A woman in a white dress that looked old-fashioned, like something from the 1800s. Her long black hair hung down over her face, and she was crying. That same heartbroken sound I'd heard the night before. She was looking at all the people around Rosa's body, and her crying got louder and more desperate. Like she couldn't understand why everyone was so upset, why they weren't happy that she'd found another one of her children. Then she saw me looking at her. For just a second, our eyes met. Even from that distance, I could see the terrible sadness in her face, but also confusion, like she couldn't figure out why I wasn't thanking her for bringing Rosa home. I blinked, and she was gone. But now I knew she was real, and I knew she wasn't going to stop. That night, I drove to Knoxville to meet with a professor at the University of Tennessee who specialized in folklore and local history. Dr. Patricia Williams was a small, intense woman who took my story seriously. "You're dealing with what we call a grief manifestation," she explained. "The spirit of someone who died in such emotional trauma that part of them couldn't move on. They get stuck repeating the same actions over and over, trying to fix something that can't be fixed." "How do I stop her without hurting her?" I asked. "That's the question, isn't it? Most people would just want to get rid of the ghost, but you want to help her." Dr. Williams suggested I try to find out exactly what happened to Esperanza Morales' children. If their bodies were never found, their spirits might still be lost too. Sometimes, helping a ghost family reunite can put them all at peace. I spent the next week researching everything I could find about the 1848 flood. I contacted the Army Corps of Engineers to get information about how the creek had changed over the years. I talked to Cherokee historians about the area before white settlement. What I discovered was that the original Willow Creek had been much wider and faster in 1848. During the spring flood that killed the Morales children, the water would have been deep and violent, carrying debris for miles downstream. If the children's bodies had been swept away, they could be anywhere along a 20-mile stretch of the modern creek system. But I had an idea about how to find them. The university had just gotten some new ground-penetrating radar equipment for archaeology work. Dr. Williams agreed to bring a team out to search the areas where debris from the 1848 flood would most likely have settled. It took 3 days of searching, but we found them, 2 miles downstream from where they died, buried under decades of sediment and a landslide that must have happened sometime in the late 1800s. We located the remains of 3 children. The bones were small, fragile, but clearly human, and they were lying together like they'd been holding on to each other when they died. Now came the hard part. I had to figure out how to reunite Esperanza with her children without anyone else getting hurt. I knew La Llorona would be at Willow Creek that night. She appeared every evening now, walking up and down the creek, crying and looking for children. The Latino families had stopped coming entirely, but other families still visited during the day. It was only a matter of time before she tried to take another child. I went to the creek alone just before sunset, carrying the small wooden box that contained the children's remains. Dr. Williams had wanted to come with me, but I knew this was something I had to do myself. The plan was simple. Show Esperanza her children's bones, help her understand that they were at peace, and convince her to let go of her grief so all of them could move on together. Simple plans never work out the way you expect. I was sitting on the creek bank, waiting, when the temperature suddenly dropped about 20 degrees. My breath started showing in the air, and the EMF detector I'd borrowed from a paranormal researcher friend started going crazy. Then I heard the crying. She appeared in the water about 10 feet from where I was sitting. Not transparent like movie ghosts, but solid-looking, real. The white dress was actually a nightgown, torn and stained with mud and water. Her feet were bare, and her long black hair covered most of her face. But I could see her eyes. They were the saddest eyes I'd ever seen in my life. She looked at me and spoke in Spanish. "Has visto a mis niños? Have you seen my children?" "Yes," I said, also in Spanish. "I found them, Esperanza. I found your babies." She stopped crying immediately and stepped closer. "Donde están? Where are they?" I held up the wooden box. "They're here. They're safe." Or a moment. Her face filled with joy. She reached out toward the box with hands that looked real enough to touch, but then she stopped and looked confused. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, those aren't my children. My children are playing. I can hear them playing by the water." That's when I understood the horrible truth. La Llorona wasn't just taking random children. She genuinely believed each child she drowned was one of her own kids, returned to her somehow. Rosa Herrera wasn't just a victim. In Esperanza's mind, Rosa was her daughter. Finally come home. "Esperanza," I said gently, "your children died in the flood. You've been looking for them for almost 150 years. She got angry then. The water around her feet started to churn and bubble. "Mentiras. Lies. My children are here. They call to me every day." The crying started again, but louder now, more desperate. And I realized something that made my blood freeze. She was calling them. "Rosa, Miguel, Carmen," she cried, using the names of the children she'd drowned. "Vengan con mamá! Come to mama!" And they came. 3 small figures emerged from the creek downstream. Not the bones I'd found, but the spirits of the children La Llorona had taken. They looked like they were sleepwalking, moving toward her with empty eyes. "You see?" Esperanza said, her voice full of love and triumph. "My babies always come home to me. I realized then why the Latino family's stories had been so consistent. The children who drowned hadn't just been drawn to the water. They'd been drawn to help what they saw as a sad, lost mother. But once La Llorona touched them, they became part of her delusion, part of her twisted family. Esperanza, I said, opening the wooden box. These are your real children. I showed her the small bones, and for just a moment her face changed. I saw recognition there, and terrible understanding. But then she looked at the 3 spirit children walking toward her, and the delusion snapped back into place. No, she said firmly. These are my children. They're alive. They're home. The spirit children reached her and took her hands. They looked happy, peaceful even. But they were dead, trapped in her grief, just like she was. I tried a different approach. Esperanza, do you remember the flood? Do you remember the water taking them away? Pain flashed across her face. See, the water was so cold, so fast. I couldn't catch them. It wasn't your fault, I said. You couldn't have saved them. She looked at me with those heartbroken eyes. But a mother should protect her children. I should have died with them. You did die, Esperanza. You died of grief that winter. You've been dead for 150 years. She stared at me, and I saw confusion and fear replace the anger. The spirit children holding her hands flickered like candles in the wind. If I'm dead, she whispered, then my children are dead too, I finished gently. They've been waiting for you to let them go. The truth hit her all at once. The real children, her children, began to appear in the water beside her. Not the confused spirits of Rosa, Miguel, and Carmen, but 3 small figures who looked exactly like Esperanza. Her real son and daughters, the ones she'd been searching for all these years. They were beautiful, glowing softly, and they were calling to her. Mama, one of them said, we've been waiting for you. We're ready to go home now. Esperanza looked back and forth between the living children she'd taken and her own children's spirits. The delusion was finally breaking apart. I'm so sorry, she cried. And this time the tears sounded different. Not desperate anymore, but full of understanding and release. I'm so sorry I took you from your families. The spirits of Rosa, Miguel, and Carmen began to fade, returning to whatever peace they'd been pulled from. But they smiled at Esperanza before they disappeared, forgiving her. Mama, her real children called again. Go me home with us. Esperanza looked at me one last time. Will you tell the families I'm sorry? Will you tell them I thought their children were mine? I'll tell them. I promised. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her. Then she took her children's hands and walked deeper into the creek. As they disappeared beneath the water, the whole forest seemed to exhale. The temperature returned to normal, the water stopped churning, and for the first time in months, Willow Creek sounded peaceful again. The Latino community slowly started returning to Willow Creek, but it took time. Trust is hard to rebuild after something like that. I worked with local families to create a small memorial garden near the creek. Nothing fancy, just some flowers, a wooden bench, and a small plaque that read, "In memory of the Morales family, Esperanza, Diego Jr., Elena, and Rosa, reunited in peace." I never told anyone exactly what happened that night. How do you explain something like that in a report? Instead, I focused on the practical things. Better safety signs around the creek, more frequent patrols during busy weekends, educational programs about water safety. But the Latino families knew. They understood that something had changed, that the sadness was gone from the water. Mrs. Ramirez brought her family back for a picnic a month later. She found me afterward and gave me a hug. "Gracias, Elena," she said. "You helped her find peace." "How did you know?" I asked. She smiled. "Because my grandmother told me stories too, about how sometimes the dead just need someone to listen to them, to help them remember who they really are." Dr. Williams published a paper about the archaeological discovery of the children's remains, but she kept the supernatural parts out of it. That was fine with me. Some stories don't need to be in academic journals. I kept working as a ranger for another 15 years after that. I dealt with other strange things in the forest. Most mountains have their share of unexplained phenomena, but nothing like La Llorona Agan. My own daughter, Sophia, grew up hearing these stories. She became fascinated with folklore and psychology, and now she's working on her PhD in anthropological studies. She wants to research how traditional stories help communities process trauma. "You saved those families, Mom," she told me once. "Not just from a ghost, but from losing their connection to a place they loved." Maybe that's true. All I know is that I learned something important during those months in 1991. Some spirits aren't evil. They're just lost, trapped by love that has nowhere to go. And sometimes the best thing you can do for a ghost is the same thing you'd do for any grieving parent. Listen to their story, acknowledge their pain, and help them find a way to let go. Willow Creek is still one of my favorite places in Cherokee National Forest. Families come there all the time now, and children play safely in the shallow water. Sometimes, when the evening light hits the creek just right, I think I can see 4 figures walking together in the distance, finally at peace. But I never go there alone after sunset. Some things are better left undisturbed, even when they've found their happy ending. The dead deserve their rest, and the living deserve to keep living. That's a lesson my grandmother would have been proud of. My name is Robert McCain, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 21 years now, just like my daddy before me, though he only lasted 15 before his heart gave out. We're Kentucky mountain people, born and raised in these hills. My granddaddy used to say the forest gets in your blood, and once it's there, it never leaves. I know every trail, every creek, every cave in these mountains. I can tell you where the best fishing holes are, which hollows get the first frost, and where you shouldn't go walking after dark. That last part isn't something they teach you in ranger school. It's something you learn from growing up here, from listening to the old folks talk when they think kids aren't paying attention. See, my family's got history in these woods. Not all of it good. My granddaddy, Earl McCain, was what you might call a businessman back in the 20s and 30s. Of course, his business happened to involve cooking corn mash in copper pots hidden deep in the hollows, away from prying eyes and federal badges. Moonshine, they called it. White lightning, Mountain Dew. Whatever name you gave it, it was illegal, and it made Earl McCain a wealthy man for a while. Daddy never talked much about those days. Said the past was better left buried. He became a ranger to go legitimate, as he put it, to make up for what came before. But you can't outrun your blood, and you sure can't outrun the things that happened in these mountains. I learned that lesson the hard way in the summer of 1974. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in July. I was drinking coffee at the ranger station, going over the day's patrol routes, when the phone rang. "Bobby? This is Agent Henderson, FBI. We're going to need your help with something." That got my attention real quick. FBI don't usually call mountain rangers unless something big is happening. "What can I do for you, Agent Henderson?" "We've got some folks from the university doing an archaeological survey up in the hollow they call Moonshine. You know it?" Did I know it? Hell, I could walk there blindfolded. Moonshine Hollow was one of the deepest, most remote spots in the forest. Steep sides, thick woods, and a creek that ran year-round. It was also where my granddaddy used to run his biggest still. "I know it," I said. "Good. Well, these college boys found something they weren't expecting. Human remains. A lot of them. We need someone who knows the area to help us get equipment in and out." My coffee turned cold in my cup. "How many bodies we talking about?" 13, all male. Been there a long time, from what the bones tell us. 13 bodies in Moonshine Hollow. My stomach started doing flips, but I kept my voice steady. "When do you need me?" "This afternoon. Can you meet us at the old logging road that heads up toward the hollow?" "I'll be there." After I hung up, I sat in that chair for a long time, staring out the window at the green mountains. Daddy had been dead 3 years now, and Granddaddy Earl longer than that. Whatever secrets they'd kept were buried with them. Or so I'd thought. The July heat was thick as molasses when I met Agent Henderson and his team at the logging road. Henderson was a tall, thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. With him was Dr. Sarah Collins, the archaeologist from the university, and 2 other agents I didn't catch the names of. "Appreciate you coming, McCain," Henderson said, shaking my hand. "This is going to be sensitive. Word gets out about 13 bodies in a national forest. We'll have reporters crawling all over these mountains." "My lips are sealed," I said. "What exactly did you find?" Dr. Collins spoke up. She was a young woman, maybe 30, with dirt under her fingernails and excitement in her eyes, the kind of excitement that comes from finding something important. "We were doing a survey of possible Native American sites," she said, "looking for old settlements, burial grounds, that sort of thing. We were using ground-penetrating radar when we found an anomaly, a large depression that looked like it might be a mass grave." "And it was," Henderson added grimly. 13 skeletons, all adult males. From the clothes and personal items we found, we're looking at the 1920s, maybe early 1930s. My mouth went dry. "Any idea who they were?" Henderson and Collins exchanged a look. "That's where it gets interesting," Henderson said, "and problematic. We found federal badges, McCain, revenue agents. These boys were feds." The world seemed to tilt sideways. 13 federal agents buried in Moonshine Hollow during Prohibition, during the time when my granddaddy was running shine and the federal government was trying to shut him down. "You okay, McCain?" Henderson was looking at me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." If only he knew how right he was about to be. The hike up to Moonshine Hollow took about an hour. I led the way, following trails I'd walked since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. But something felt different. Wrong. The birds were too quiet. The air was too still. Even the creek seemed to be running softer than usual, like it was trying not to make noise. When we reached the site, I understood why Dr. Collins had been so excited. They'd carefully excavated a rectangular depression about 20 feet long and 12 feet wide. 13 skeletons lay there, arranged in 2 neat rows. They still wore the remains of their clothes. Dark suits, now just scraps of fabric. Brass buttons gleamed dull in the filtered sunlight. And the badges. Federal revenue agent badges, tarnished black with age. "Jesus," I whispered. "My thoughts exactly," Henderson said. "This wasn't random violence. Look how they're arranged. Someone took time to lay them out proper." Dr. Collins knelt beside one of the skeletons. "The interesting thing is, there's no sign of violence on the bones. No bullet holes, no fractures from blunt force trauma. Whatever killed these men, it didn't leave marks on their bones." I stared down at those 13 sets of remains and felt something cold crawl up my spine. Not the kind of cold you get from weather, the kind that comes from deep inside, from knowledge you don't want to have. "Agent Henderson," I said slowly, "what do you know about what happened in these mountains during Prohibition?" "Some. There were federal raids on illegal stills. Revenue agents came through regularly." "Why?" "Because 13 agents don't just disappear without someone noticing. If federal boys went missing in 1929 or 1930, there would have been investigations, searches. Hell, they would have torn these mountains apart looking for them." Henderson's tired eyes got a little sharper. "You think there was a cover-up?" "I think," I said carefully, "that things were different then. Federal government wasn't as thorough as they are now. What I didn't say was that I was starting to remember stories, whispered conversations I'd overheard as a boy. Talk about the big raid and the night the government men came, and what Earl and his boys had to do. Stories that always ended with someone telling the speaker to hush up, that some things were better left alone." We finished documenting the site and headed back down the mountain as the sun was getting low. I walked behind the group, my mind racing. 13 federal agents, buried in the hollow where my granddaddy ran his biggest still. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those bones, about the careful way they'd been arranged. Someone had taken time to lay those men out proper, almost respectful-like. That didn't sound like murder to me. It sounded like burial after a battle. I must have fennite. Ally dozed off around 3 in the morning because that's when the radio started acting up. I keep a shortwave radio by my bed, mostly for weather reports and emergency calls. It was crackling with static when something woke me up. I reached over to turn it off, but then I heard voices. "Base, this is Unit 7. We're approaching the target location. Smoke visible from the ridgeline." I sat up in bed. The voice was faint, full of static, but clear enough to understand. "Roger, Unit 7. Remember, we want the equipment destroyed, but we need the operators alive for questioning." "Understood, Base. Moving in now." I fumbled for the dial, trying to find the frequency, but the voices faded into static. Then silence. I checked the clock. 3:17 a.m. Modern federal agencies don't use shortwave radio anymore. Haven't for decades. And they sure don't call each other Unit 7 and Base. But federal revenue agents in 1929 might have. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I drove back up to Moonshine Hollow. I told myself I was just checking the site, making sure everything was secure. But really, I was looking for answers. The forest felt different in daylight, but not normal. Too quiet still. I noticed the temperature seemed to drop as I got closer to the excavation site. Not much, but enough to make me wish I'd brought a jacket, even though it was July in Kentucky. The site was undisturbed, yellow tape still fluttering in the breeze. I stood at the edge of the excavation, looking down at those 13 skeletons. And that's when I saw him. A man in a dark suit and tie standing on the far side of the dig. He was writing in a small notebook, like he was taking notes. His badge caught the morning light. I blinked, and he was gone. My heart was hammering in my chest. I walked around the excavation, looking for footprints, broken branches, any sign that someone had been there. Nothing. The forest floor was undisturbed, but the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. I was backing away from the site when I heard it. Footsteps in the leaves behind me. Slow, measured, like someone walking a patrol route. I spun around. Nothing there. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed off the hollow walls. "Anybody there?" Silence. Then, faint as a whisper, words that made my blood freeze. "Federal agents, you're under arrest." The voice was thin, distant, like it was coming from the bottom of a well, but it was real. I heard it clear as day. I ran. A 42-year-old man with 21 years of ranger experience, and I ran like a scared kid. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, and I didn't slow down until I was back in town. That night I called my Uncle Pete. He was my daddy's older brother, pushing 80 but still sharp as a tack. If anyone knew the real story about what happened in Moonshine Hollow, it would be Pete. "Bobby? What's got you calling this late?" "Uncle Pete, I need to ask you something. About Granddaddy Earl. About what happened during Prohibition." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. "Pete, you there?" "I'm here." His voice was different now. Careful. "What's this about, boy?" "They found bodies up in Moonshine Hollow. Federal agents, 13 of them." Another long silence. "Pete? You need to let this alone, Bobby." "I can't. I'm the ranger they called to help with the investigation. I can't just walk away." "Then you need to be careful. Real careful. Some things are better left buried." "What happened, Pete? What really happened?" I heard him sigh, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "It was 1929, the big raid. Feds had been watching Earl's operation for months, planning something big. They came in force. 13 agents plus local law. But Earl, he had friends, people who warned him. What did he do? What he had to do, what any man would do to protect his family, his livelihood. But Bobby, those agents, though, I didn't just disappear. They were buried proper, with respect. Earl saw to that. You were there. We all were. The whole family. It was war, Bobby. Us against them. But when it was over, Earl made sure those men got a decent burial. He felt bad about it, carried that guilt the rest of his life. How did they die, Pete? The silence stretched out again. Pete? Cave in, he said finally. Earl's boys brought down part of the ridge line, blocked the only way out of the hollow. The agents, they suffocated in the cave. We dug them out, but it was too late. Jesus Christ. Earl never got over it. Said those men were just doing their jobs, same as him. Said they deserved better than to die trapped in the dark. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, staring at the wall. 13 federal agents killed in a cave-in during a raid on my granddaddy's still. Buried with respect but never reported, never investigated. Their families probably never knew what happened to them. And now something was stirring in Moonshine Hollow. Something that had been sleeping for 45 years was waking up. I should have known it was just the beginning. The next 3 days were a nightmare. It started with phone calls, people in town, folks whose families had been in these mountains for generations, calling the ranger station with strange reports, sightings of men in old-fashioned suits walking the forest trails at night, voices speaking in old-timey accents, asking questions about moonshine operations and illegal stills. Mrs. Henderson, no relation to the FBI agent, called to report that someone had been walking around her property with a lantern, checking her outbuildings like they were looking for something. When she went outside to confront them, they vanished. Old Tom Bradshaw, whose granddaddy had run shine with Earl McCain, found his front porch covered with what looked like official government papers. But when he tried to read them, they crumbled to dust in his hands. The temperature readings I was getting from Moonshine Hollow were impossible. My INSID. Truman's were showing 40-degree drops in areas no bigger than a football field, while the surrounding forest remained summer hot. But the worst call came from Jenny Morrison. Jenny's family had lived in these mountains since before the Civil War. Her great-granddaddy had been one of Earl McCain's partners. She was crying when she called. "Bobby, you gotta help me. There's something wrong at my place. Real wrong." "What kind of wrong, Jenny?" "There's men in suits standing in my yard, 3 of them. They're just standing there, staring at the house. They've been there since midnight." I looked at the clock. It was 6 in the morning. "Did you call the sheriff?" "I called everybody. Sheriff, state police, even called the FBI number that Agent Henderson gave me. Nobody sees them but me. They keep asking. They keep asking about the raid, about what my great-granddaddy did during the raid." "Jenny, I'm on my way." I found Jenny sitting on her porch with a shotgun across her knees, shivering despite the heat. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. "They're still there," she whispered, pointing to her front yard. I looked, saw nothing but grass and an old oak tree. "I don't see anybody, Jenny." "Right there, by the oak tree. 3 men in federal badges. The one in the middle keeps writing in a little book." A chill ran down my spine. "What's he writing?" "Names," she said. "He's writing down names." I walked out into the yard, feeling foolish but needing to try. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as soon as I stepped off the porch. My breath started misting in the suddenly frigid air. "Hello?" I called out. "My name is Bobby McCain. I'm a park ranger. If someone's there, I'd like to talk to you." The cold got worse. Ice crystals started forming on the oak tree's leaves. Then I heard it. The sound of a pencil scratching on paper. "Special Agent Morrison," a voice said, thin as smoke. "Revenue Service. We're conducting an investigation into illegal distilling operations in this area. We need to speak with Thomas Morrison regarding his involvement in the attack on federal agents in Moonshine Hollow." I couldn't see him, but I could feel him, a presence, standing just a few feet away. "Thomas Morrison is dead," I said. "He died 20 years ago. Then we need to speak with his descendants. Justice will be served." "What kind of justice?" The scratching sound stopped. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The same justice that was denied to 13 federal agents in 1929. Then the cold lifted, and whatever had been there was gone. Jenny was staring at me from the porch, her face white as paper. "You heard them too." "I heard them." That night, things got worse. A lot worse. I was patrolling the roads around Moonshine Hollow when my radio started acting up again. The same 1920s voices I'd heard before, but clearer now. Stronger. Base, this is Agent Morrison. We're at the Morrison property. Subject is uncooperative. Roger Morrison. What's the status of the other suspects? We have eyes on the Bradshaw place and the Henderson farm. Recommend moving to apprehension phase. Negative, Morrison. Maintain surveillance only. We need all subjects accounted for before we move. I grabbed my radio. Unknown station, this is Park Ranger McCain. Identify yourself. Static. Then, Ranger McCain. We know who you are. We know about your grandfather. My blood turned to ice water. Earl McCain was complicit in the murder of 13 federal agents. Justice will be served. Earl McCain is dead. Justice will be served. The radio went dead. I drove straight to town. To every family I knew had connections to the old moonshine operations. What I found scared the hell out of me. The Hendersons, the Bradshaw, the Morrisons, the Kellys, the Washingtons. Every family whose ancestors had been involved with Earl McCain's operation was experiencing the same thing. Sightings of federal agents from the 1920s. Voices demanding justice. Temperature drops that turned July nights into winter. And people were getting sick. Really sick. Tom Bradshaw was in the hospital with what doctors were calling severe hypothermia, even though he'd been found in his own bed. His body temperature had dropped to 82 degrees. The doctors couldn't explain it. Mrs. Kelly's grandson had been found unconscious in his car, frost covering the windows from the inside. In July. Something was hunting the descendants of the men who had killed those federal agents, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. I sat in my truck outside the hospital trying to figure out what to do. These were my people, my community, my responsibility. And somewhere in all this was my own family's guilt. That's when I remembered Dr. Sarah Collins, the archaeologist. She'd been excited about the find, but she'd also seemed to understand the historical significance. Maybe she could help me understand what we were dealing with. I found her at the motel where the FBI team was staying. She was sitting in the parking lot, smoking a cigarette and staring up at the mountains. Dr. Collins? It's Bobby McCain, the park ranger. She looked up, and I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Ranger McCain, I was hoping you'd come by. Something wrong? Everything's wrong. She took a long drag on her cigarette. Agent Henderson sent the other agents back to Louisville this morning. Said they'd get the bodies processed through the FBI lab in Quantico, but he stayed, and he's different. Different how? He's been talking to himself, having conversations with people who aren't there. This afternoon I found him at the excavation site, standing in the middle of those bones, arguing with someone I couldn't see. My stomach dropped. What was he saying? He kept apologizing, saying he was sorry that they deserved better, that he was going to make it right. Then he started asking questions about Earl McCain and the other moonshiners, like he was interviewing invisible suspects. Where is he now? Room 12. But Ranger McCain, I don't think he's entirely himself anymore. I walked to room 12 and knocked on the door. No answer. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open. Agent Henderson was sitting at a small table, writing in a notebook. He was wearing a suit, but not the modern cut he'd had on before. This one looked older, more formal, like something from the 1920s. Agent Henderson? He looked up and his eyes were different, colder, distant. Ranger McCain, please have a seat. I have some questions about your grandfather. His voice had changed too. The accent was different, more clipped, formal. Agent Henderson, are you feeling all right? I'm feeling just fine, Ranger. Better than I have in years. Now, about Earl McCain. We have reason to believe he was the leader of the illegal distilling operation that resulted in the deaths of 13 federal agents in 1929. What can you tell me about that? I backed toward the door. Agent Henderson, it's 1974. Earl McCain died 15 years ago. He smiled, but it wasn't Henderson's smile. It was cold. Official. Time is relative, Ranger McCain. Justice is eternal. Now sit down. We have a lot to discuss. That's when I realized the truth. The spirits of those 13 federal agents weren't just haunting the descendants of their killers. They were possessing people, taking over their bodies to complete their investigation. And I was next on their list. I ran from that motel room like the devil himself was chasing me. Maybe he was. Agent Henderson, or whatever was wearing his body, didn't follow me. He just sat at that table, writing in his notebook, planning his investigation like he had all the time in the world. Which, I guess he did. The dead aren't exactly in a hurry. I drove straight to my Uncle Pete's house. If anyone knew how to deal with this situation, it would be him. He'd been there during the Origins Nal raid. He knew what really happened. I found Pete sitting on his front porch, shotgun across his lap, staring out at the forest like he was expecting company. "Figured you'd be coming by," he said without looking at me. "Pete, we got a problem, a big one." "I know." Tom Bradshaw called from the hospital. Said he's been having dreams about the night of the raid. Dreams where 13 men in federal badges are standing around his bed asking him questions about what his granddaddy did. I sat down in the chair next to him. The air was cold, even though it was July. Too cold. "They're not dreams, Pete." "I know that too." He worked a plug of tobacco into his cheek. "Your granddaddy always said this day would come. Said the dead don't forget, and they don't forgive." What did he mean? Pete was quiet for a long time, working his jaw around that tobacco. Finally, he spit into the darkness and spoke. "Earl didn't tell you the whole truth about what happened that night. None of us did. We couldn't." "What really happened?" "The cave-in wasn't an accident, Bobby. Earl brought down that ridge on purpose. He knew those agents were in the cave, and he'd buried them alive." The words hit me like a physical blow. Jesus Christ. But that's not the worst part. Pete's voice was barely above a whisper. "Earl made a deal that night. A bargain." "What kind of bargain?" "The spirits of those 13 agents. They came to him after he buried them. Came to him in dreams, night after night. They were angry, Bobby. Madder than hornets. They wanted revenge on everyone who was involved. Earl, me, Tom's granddaddy, all of us." "What did Earl do?" "He offered them a trade. He said they could have their revenge, but not right then. Not on the men who killed them. He asked them to wait. To give the families time to live their lives, raise their children, make something of themselves." "And though I agreed?" "They agreed to wait 45 years. 45 years for the families to enjoy the profits of their illegal business. But after that," Pete trailed off, "after that, they'd come for justice." "That's right. And Bobby, it's been 45 years. To the day." A cold wind blew through the trees, carrying with it the sound of footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps, walking in formation. "They're coming," Pete whispered. I looked down the dirt road that led to Pete's house and saw them. 13 figures in dark suits walking slowly but steadily toward us. Their badges caught the moonlight. Their faces were pale and grim. "Uncle Pete, we need to get inside." "Won't matter. They can go anywhere they want, do anything they want." He stood up, gripping his shotgun. "But a man's got to try." The lead figure stopped at the edge of Pete's yard. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the night air. "Peter McCain, we're here about the events of July 15th, 1929. You are under arrest for the murder of 13 federal agents." "I'm an old man," Pete called back. "Whatever happened back then, it's long over. Justice is never over." The agent started walking again, and the others followed. "You will come with us." That's when I stepped off the porch. "Wait," I said. "You want justice? Then let's talk about justice." The lead agent stopped. His eyes were dark holes in his pale face. "Robert McCain, grandson of Earl McCain. We've been waiting to speak with you." "Then speak." "Your grandfather murdered 13 federal agents in the execution of their lawful duties. He must pay for his crimes." "My grandfather is dead. He paid with 45 years of guilt and nightmares. I know because I lived with him. I saw what it did to him. Death does not absolve guilt. Maybe not. But tell me this. What about justice for him, for his family, for everyone who suffered because of what happened that night? The agent tilted his head, interested despite himself. Explain. You came here to shut down illegal stills, to enforce federal law. But why were people making moonshine in the first place? Because they were poor, because they were hungry, because the government didn't give a damn about mountain people unless they were breaking federal laws. I took a step closer to the agent. The cold radiating from him was like walking into a freezer. Earl McCain wasn't a criminal. He was a businessman trying to feed his family. You came here with badges and guns, ready to destroy his livelihood and put him in prison. What was he supposed to do? Just let you? He was supposed to obey the law. Whose law? A law made by rich men in Washington who never went hungry, who never had to choose between feeding their children and following federal regulations. The agent was silent, but I could see the others behind him shifting, uncertain. You want justice? I continued. Then let's have real justice. Earl McCain killed 13 federal agents, but the federal government killed Earl McCain just as sure as if they'd put a gun to his head. They killed his spirit, his hope, his future. They turned him into a man who had to choose between his family and his conscience. The law is the law. The law was wrong. You know it and I know it, and somewhere deep down, Earl knew it too. That's why he carried the guilt for 45 years. That's why he made you wait. He knew that what happened was a tragedy for everyone involved. I looked past the lead agent to the 12 others standing behind him. You were good men. I can see that. You were just doing your jobs, following orders, trying to serve your country. But you died for a law that was bad from the beginning, a law that turned neighbors against neighbors and fathers against sons. The lead agent's expression softened slightly. What are you proposing? An end to it. A real end. You've had your justice. The families involved have suffered for 45 years. Tom Bradshaw is in the hospital. Mrs. Morrison is scared out of her mind. Agent Henderson is possessed by one of your own. How much more suffering do you need? We need acknowledgement, recognition of what was done to us. Then you'll have it. I'll make sure of it. A proper memorial, official recognition, the whole thing. But in return, you have to let this go. You have to let the families heal. The agent was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked back at his 12 companions. What guarantee do we have? My word, the word of Earl McCain's grandson. And if that's not enough, then take me instead. Let me pay for what my grandfather did. Bobby, no. Pete stepped forward, but I held up a hand to stop him. One life for 13? The agent asked. If that's what it takes. The agent studied me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Very well. But not your life, Robert McCain. Your service. You will ensure that our sacrifice is remembered. You will make sure the truth is told. And you will carry the responsibility that your grandfather carried, the knowledge of what happened here. I accept. The agent extended his hand. When I took it, the cold shot through me like electricity. For a moment I saw everything. The raid, the cave-in, the deaths, the burial, Earl's 45 years of guilt and nightmares. I felt it all, and it nearly drove me to my knees. When the vision ended, the 13 agents were gone, but the cold remained. It took 6 months to arrange everything properly. The FBI wasn't happy about the situation, especially after Agent Henderson turned up in his motel room with no memory of the previous 3 days and hypothermia that nearly killed him. But when I explained what I wanted to do, a proper memorial service for the 13 agents, complete with federal honors, they agreed to cooperate. The hardest part was convincing the families. The Hendersons, the Bradshaws, the Morrisons, and the others didn't want anything to do with a ceremony that would acknowledge their ancestors' involvement in the agents' deaths. It took weeks of meetings, arguments, and careful explanations before they agreed to participate. The memorial service was held on a cold day in January 1975, exactly 45 years and 6 months after the raid. We held it at Moonshine Hollow, at the site where the agents had been found. A dozen FBI agents came down from Louisville, including a special unit that handles honors ceremonies. They brought proper federal flags, a bugle player, and even arranged for a military helicopter to fly over during the service. The local families came too, eventually. Tom Bradshaw was out of the hospital by then, still weak but determined to be there. Mrs. Morrison brought her whole family, including the grandchildren who had been experiencing the hauntings. Even some of the older folks who remembered the Prohibition days attended. Dr. Sarah Collins had worked with local historians to prepare a proper account of what happened. She read it aloud during the ceremony, explaining the historical context without placing blame on any specific individuals. When it came time for me to speak, I stood at the edge of the excavation site where 13 federal agents had lain forgotten for 45 years. These men died doing their jobs, I said. They came to these mountains to enforce federal law, and they paid the ultimate price. They were somebody's sons, somebody's husbands, somebody's fathers. They deserved better than to be forgotten. I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people whose families had carried guilt and secrets for nearly half a century. But the men who killed them weren't monsters. They were mountain people trying to protect their families and their way of life. They made a terrible choice in a desperate situation, and they paid for it in their own way. The FBI Honor Guard fired their 21-gun salute. The bugle player performed taps. The helicopter dropped a wreath into the hollow, ace. And for the first time since the investigation began, the temperature in Moonshine Hollow felt normal. After the ceremony, Agent Henderson approached me. He looked older, more tired, but relieved. "You did a good thing here, McCain," he said. "I don't understand everything that happened, but I know it was the right thing." "I hope so." "The Bureau is going to officially close the case. Listed as a historical matter, resolved through proper commemoration. No charges will be filed." I shook his hand. "Thank you." As the crowd dispersed and the federal agents packed up their equipment, I stood alone at the memorial site. A simple granite marker had been installed, listing the names of the 13 agents and the date of their deaths. It didn't mention how they died or who killed them. It just acknowledged their service and their sacrifice. The sun was setting behind the mountains when I finally turned to leave. That's when I saw him, a figure in a dark suit standing at the edge of the tree line, the lead agent from that night at Pete's house. He raised his hand in what might have been a salute or a farewell gesture. Then he faded into the shadows between the trees. I never saw any of them again. But sometimes on quiet nights when I'm patrolling the forest, I still hear things. The sound of footsteps on mountain trails, voices carrying on the wind, radio chatter from equipment that shouldn't exist anymore. The mountains remember everything. They always have. And now they have one more story to keep. The story of 13 federal agents who got their justice, and 13 families who found their peace, and one park ranger who learned that sometimes the only way to heal old wounds is to acknowledge the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Earl McCain's guilt. My name is David Kowalski, and I've been a forest ranger for 14 years. People think it's a quiet job, just walking trails and watching trees grow. They're wrong. The forest talks to you if you know how to listen, and sometimes it screams. I grew up hearing stories about coal mines. My grandfather came from Poland to dig coal in Pennsylvania. My uncle Stanislaw died in a mine back in 1902 before I was ever born. Dad used to say the mountain ate him alive. That's why I became a ranger. I wanted to work above ground, where I could see the sky. In 1979, they sent me to Black Mountain in Jefferson National Forest, Virginia. Beautiful place. Tall trees, clean streams, birds singing in the morning. But something felt wrong from the first day. The deer stayed away from certain areas. Dogs wouldn't go near the old mine openings. Even the birds got quiet when you walked past those dark holes in the rock. Black Mountain had a coal mining history. Big disaster in 1902. Gas explosion killed 112 men. Most were immigrants like my family. The mining company sealed up the tunnels after that, said it was too dangerous. For 70 years, the mountain stayed quiet. Then Strip Mining Solutions, Inc. showed up with big machines and bigger promises. They had legal permits to mine the edges of the forest, said they'd create jobs and follow all the rules. The Forest Service told me to keep an eye on them, make sure they stayed inside their boundaries. I should have known trouble was coming when the hikers started their stories. "Ranger, you hear that coughing sound near the old mines? Sounds like 100 men are sick down there. My dog ran away when we got close. Never seen him so scared." At first, I thought it was just wind through the tunnels. Old mines make strange sounds, but then I heard it myself. Deep, wet coughing that seemed to come from inside the mountain. It sounded like men dying of black lung disease. I met Bobby Chen at the ranger station. He was a sound engineer from Virginia Tech, studying forest acoustics. Smart kid with expensive recording equipment. When I told him about the sounds, his eyes lit up. "Can you take me there? I want to record whatever's making that noise." We hiked up to the old mine entrance on a gray October morning. The air was cold and still. No wind at all, but we could hear it. That terrible coughing sound echoing from deep underground. Bobby set up his microphones and recording gear. His face went white when he put on the headphones. "Jesus, David, listen to this." I took the headphones. Through the static, I could hear voices, men calling out in languages I didn't recognize. Someone was singing what sounded like a hymn. And underneath it all, that awful coughing, like lungs full of coal dust. "That's impossible," Bobby whispered. "These mines have been sealed for decades." But I was starting to remember my grandfather's stories, how the dead don't always stay buried, how some places hold on to their ghosts. We spent 3 hours at that mine entrance. Bobby recorded everything. The voices got clearer as the day went on. I started to pick out words, some in broken English, some in Polish, some in languages I couldn't identify. "Help us. Can't breathe. The roof is falling." When we finally hiked back to the ranger station, Bobby's hands were shaking. He played back the recordings, and we both heard something that made our blood freeze. At the end of the tape, clear as day, a voice called out, "Davy? Little Davy Kowalski?" That was my grandfather's nickname for me. But there was no way anyone at that mine could have known my name. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the voice on the tape, about my Uncle Stanislaw, who died in those tunnels, about the 112 men who never made it home, me to their families. I was about to learn that some ghosts don't stay quiet forever. The next morning brought bad news. Strip Mining Solutions had moved their equipment closer to the old mine area. Their big machines were digging into the mountainside, following a new coal seam. Black smoke poured from their diesel engines. The sound of grinding metal echoed across the valley. I drove my truck up the mountain road to talk to their foreman, a big guy named Jake Sullivan. He was standing next to a massive excavator, yelling orders at the crew. "You need to be careful around those old mines," I told him. "The tunnels aren't stable." Jake laughed. "Ranger, I've been mining coal for 20 years. I know what I'm doing. Those old holes are sealed up tight." But I could see cracks in the rock face where their machines had been digging, dark gaps that looked like they went deep into the mountain, and I could smell something in the air. Not just diesel fumes, but something else. Something old and rotten. "My equipment says there's methane gas coming from those cracks," I said. "That's dangerous." "Your equipment is wrong," Jake said. "Our safety monitors don't show anything." That afternoon, the problems started. First, their biggest excavator broke down. Engine just died for no reason. The mechanic couldn't find anything wrong with it, but it wouldn't start. Then the second machine started making a grinding noise, like gears full of sand. The workers began talking among themselves. Quiet conversations that stopped when Jake came near. I overheard pieces. Saw lights in that tunnel, like helmet lamps. Heard someone speaking foreign words. My grandfather was a miner. He said dead miners don't rest easy. Jake told them to shut up and get back to work. But I could see the fear in their eyes. That evening, I was walking the forest boundary when I saw him. A man in old-fashioned mining clothes stood near the tree line. He was holding a safety lamp, the kind they used in coal mines back in my grandfather's day. The lamp cast a dim yellow light in the growing darkness. I called out, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here!" The man turned toward me. His face was pale and drawn, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. Coal dust covered his clothes. When he spoke, I could hear an accent. Polish, like my grandfather's. "Dangerous work," he said in broken English. "Bad air coming. Roof fall soon." I blinked, and he was gone. Just vanished. But I could still smell coal dust in the air. I spent that night researching the 1902 disaster, found old newspaper articles in the county library. The explosion happened on October 15th. Methane gas built up in the tunnels because the mining company ignored safety warnings. When it finally blew, it trapped 112 men underground. The rescue teams worked for 6 days, but they couldn't reach the trapped miners. They could hear them singing hymns and calling for help, but the tunnels had collapsed. By the time they dug through the rubble, everyone was dead. The list of victims included my great-uncle, Stanislaw Kowalski, age 28, survived by wife Anna and 3 children. I was looking at his death certificate when my phone rang. It was Jake Sullivan, and he sounded scared. "Ranger, we got a problem up here. My night crew just quit. All of them." "What happened?" "They say they saw miners in the tunnels. Guys with old safety lamps walking around where nobody should be. The whole crew ran off the job." I drove up the mountain in the dark. Jake's trailer office had all the lights on. He was pacing back and forth, drinking coffee and looking nervous. "This is crazy," he said. "There's nobody in those old mines. They've been sealed for decades." But as we stood outside his trailer, we both heard it. The sound of men walking underground, footsteps echoing in empty tunnels, and that terrible coughing sound, like lungs full of coal dust and death. Jake's methane detectors started going off, all of them at once. The alarms were so loud we had to cover our ears. "Those things have never malfunctioned before," Jake shouted over the noise. I looked toward the old mine entrance and saw lights, moving in the darkness. Dozens of them. Like a whole crew of miners with safety lamps working the night shift in mines that had been dead for 70 years. "Jake," I said, grabbing his arm, "you need to shut down this operation. Something's wrong here." "I can't shut down. We're behind schedule already. The company will fire me." "The company won't fire you if you're dead." But Jake was thinking about money, not safety. Just like the mining bosses in 1902. As I drove home that night, I saw him in my headlights, the same miner with the safety lamp standing by the side of the road. He raised his hand like he was trying to wave me down. I stopped the truck and rolled down the window. "Stanislaw?" I called out. The ghost miner nodded. "Little Davy, you look like your Jadek, like grandfather." "Uncle Stanislaw, what do you want?" "Stop the machines," he said. "Mountain is angry. If they keep digging, everyone dies, like before." "How do I stop them?" But when I blinked, he was gone again. Just empty road and darkness. I was starting to understand that my family's ghosts had come back for a reason, and I was the only one who could hear their warning. The next morning, I called the Forest Service headquarters and asked to speak with my supervisor. I tried to explain about the safety problems, the methane gas, the unstable tunnels. I didn't mention the ghosts. "David, you're not a mining engineer," my supervisor said. "If Strip Mining Solutions has proper permits and safety certifications, we can't interfere. But people could get hurt. That's their responsibility, not ours. Just make sure they stay within their boundaries." I hung up feeling helpless. Nobody would listen to warnings about gas leaks and unstable ground. They certainly wouldn't listen to stories about ghost miners. But the ghosts weren't waiting for permission. That afternoon, all hell broke loose at 2. The mining site. Jake called me on the radio screaming, "Ranger, get up here now! We got a situation!" I raced up the mountain road and found chaos. Mining equipment was scattered everywhere like toys thrown by an angry child. The big excavator had somehow moved 50 yards from where it was supposed to be. 2 smaller machines were turned completely over. The workers stood in a group near Jake's trailer, all talking at once. "Machines move by themselves." Saw miners everywhere, guys in old clothes with safety lamps. They were trying to tell us something, but we couldn't understand the language. Jake was pale and shaking. David, I've never seen anything like it. We were digging near that old mine entrance when the ground started shaking, not like an earthquake, like something underneath was angry. Anyone hurt? Miracle, nobody died. The excavator operator jumped out just before his machine went crazy, started moving backward on its own like someone else was driving it. I looked at the disturbed ground around the old mine entrance. The machines had broken through the seal, opening a gap into the tunnels. I could see darkness beyond, and I could smell that awful smell of old death and coal dust. Jake, you need to evacuate this site. I can't. Company headquarters is sending engineers to investigate. They think it's equipment sabotage. That night, I couldn't stand doing nothing anymore. I drove back to the mountain with a powerful flashlight and my grandfather's old mining helmet. He'd given it to me as a kid. The mining site was quiet and empty. Jake's crew had gone home after the day's events. Security lights cast weird shadows across the torn-up ground. I walked to the old mine entrance and called out, "Uncle Stanislaw, I know you're here. I need to talk to you." The air got cold. My breath started coming out in clouds, even though it was a warm October night. Then I saw him. Not just Uncle Stanislaw, but dozens of ghost miners. They emerged from the dark tunnel like they were coming off shift. They wore the clothes they died in. Canvas, pants, thick shirts, mining helmets with safety lamps. Some were young men, barely 20. Others were older, with gray beards and tired eyes. They all had that pale, sick look of men who spent their lives underground. Uncle Stanislaw stepped forward. He looked exactly like the old photographs my grandfather had shown me. "Little Davy, you came. Why are you here? What do you want?" "Company men lie," he said in his broken English. "Same lies as before. Mining is safe, they say. Follow all rules, they say. But we know truth. Mountain is ready to fall." An older man with a gray beard joined us. His safety lamp flickered in the darkness. "I am Pavel," he said. "Was foreman when Mountain killed us. I tried to warn company. Too much methane gas, support beams cracking. They say, dig more coal, make more money. So we dig. Then Mountain explodes. What's happening now? New machines break old seals," Uncle Stanislaw said. "Gas building up again. Tunnels ready to collapse. If company keeps digging, Mountain falls down, takes everyone with it." Pavel nodded. 112 of us die in 1902. This time could be more, many more. How do I stop them? "You are Kowalski," Uncle Stanislaw said. "Mining family. They listen to you." But I knew Jake Sullivan wouldn't listen to ghost stories. The company executives definitely wouldn't. I needed proof they could understand. "Show me," I said. "Show me what's going to happen." The ghost miners led me into the tunnel. I expected to feel scared, but instead I felt sad. This was where my family history lived, where good men died for company profits. Inside the mountain, I could see everything. My flashlight revealed cracks in the tunnel walls, places where new digging had disturbed old support beams. I could hear water dripping somewhere deep below, and I could smell methane gas, that sweet, dangerous smell that meant explosions, oaths of death. Pavel pointed to places where the ceiling looked ready to fall. Here, and here, and here. When machines dig more, whole system collapse. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 3 days, maybe less. When gas reaches spark, boom. Mountain comes down on everyone." Uncle Stanislaw showed me deeper into the tunnels where the old disaster happened. I could still see mining equipment from 1902. Rusty picks and shovels, old lunch buckets, miners' helmets with broken lamps. "We tried to dig out," he said. 6 days we work, trying to reach surface, but too much rock, too much water. We die slow, calling for families. In the deepest part of the tunnel, he showed me a pile of rocks. My bones there, never found, never buried proper. "I'll make sure you get a proper burial," I promised. "First, stop new killing, save the living, then take care of dead." When I emerged from the tunnel, dawn was breaking over Black Mountain. The ghost miners had vanished, but their message was clear. I had maybe 3 days to prevent a disaster that would make the 1902 explosion look small. The problem was, nobody would believe me, and the mining company was bringing in bigger machines. Time was running out, and the mountain was getting angrier. I spent the morning calling everyone I could think of: mine, Safety and Health Administration, state environmental officials, county emergency services. I told them about methane gas readings, unstable ground conditions, and structural problems with the old mine system. Most calls went to voicemail. The ones I got through just told me to file reports and wait for inspections. That could take weeks. Meanwhile, Strip Mining Solutions brought in their biggest equipment yet, a massive excavator they called the Mountain Mover. Jake Sullivan was under pressure from company headquarters to make up for lost time. "We're going to dig deeper than ever," he told his crew. "Company wants that coal seam exposed by end of week." I tried one more time to warn him. "Jake, please listen. The old mine system is connected to where you're digging. If you break through the wrong wall, the whole mountain could come down. Ranger, I appreciate your concern, but our engineers know what they're doing. We got computer models, safety equipment, everything up to code. Your safety equipment has been malfunctioning for days. That's just sensitive instruments reacting to underground conditions, nothing dangerous." That afternoon, the ghost miners appeared in broad daylight. I was standing with Jake and his crew when Uncle Stanislaw walked out of the forest. Behind him came all 112 miners who died in the 1902 disaster. They carried their safety lamps and wore their death clothes. In the bright sunlight, they looked pale and strange, but completely real. The mining crew saw them too. Strong men who worked dangerous jobs every day started backing away in terror. "Holy God," whispered one of the workers. "They're miners. Dead miners." Jake's face went white. "This isn't possible. There's nobody living in those old tunnels." Uncle Stanislaw walked straight up to Jake. "You stop digging. Mountain ready to kill again." Pavel, the old foreman, joined him. "Same mistake as before. Company men think profit more important than lives." The ghost miners spread out across the worksite. They stood next to the big machines, pointing at cracks in the ground, gesturing toward the unstable tunnel entrances. They were trying to show everyone the danger. Some of the workers started talking to the ghosts. I heard fragments of conversation. "My grandfather was a miner too. How many of you died down there? Is it true the company knew about the gas?" But Jake was having none of it. "This is some kind of trick, special effects or something. David, you're behind this, trying to shut down our operation." "Jake, look at them. Really look. These are real people. Dead people don't walk around talking to you." Uncle Stanislaw heard this. He was. Cut over to Jake and put his ghostly hand on the man's shoulder. Jake jerked back like he'd been shocked. "You feel that?" Uncle Stanislaw asked. "I am real. We are all real. And we know what happens when mountain explodes." Pavel called out to all the workers. "In 1902, company ignore warnings. Gas buildup, then spark, then death. Whole families lose fathers, brothers, sons. You want same thing happen to your families?" The mining crew looked at each other. These were tough guys who'd worked dangerous jobs their whole lives. But they'd never seen anything like this. One of the younger workers, a guy named Mike, spoke up. "My great-grandfather died in a mine explosion in West Virginia. If these guys are trying to warn us—" "They're not real," Jake shouted. "It's some kind of hoax." That's when the mountain decided to prove him wrong. The ground started shaking. Not like an earthquake, like something huge moving underground. Cracks appeared in the rock face where the machines had been digging. Methane gas hissed out of the openings, making that sweet, deadly smell. All the safety alarms went off at once. Methane detectors, structural monitors, seismic equipment, everything screaming warnings. But the scariest sound was coming from deep inside the mountain, a low rumbling like a giant animal waking up, like the whole mountain was getting ready to collapse. The ghost miners started backing away from the work site. "Too late," Uncle Stanislaw said sadly. "Mountain too angry now. Everyone must leave. Now." Jake looked at his instruments. All the readings were going crazy. gas levels that should have been impossible, ground movement that meant major structural failure. "Everybody out," he finally yelled. "Evacuate the site, now!" The workers ran for their trucks. Engines started, gears ground, tires spun on loose gravel. In 5 minutes, the whole mining crew was racing down the mountain road. I stayed behind with the ghost miners, watching the mountain prepare to explode. "Will anyone die?" I asked Uncle Stanislaw. "Not if they stay away. Mountain just wants to be left alone." Pavel nodded. "We did our job. Warned the living. Now mountain can rest." The rumbling got louder. Rocks started falling from the tunnel entrances. The big mining machines creaked and groaned as the ground shifted beneath them. "Uncle Stanislaw, what about you? What about all of you? Our work here finished. We saved lives this time. Maybe now we rest too." He looked at me with sad, kind eyes. "You are good boy, little Davy. Make family proud." That was the last thing he said before the mountain came down. 3 hours later, Black Mountain collapsed. It didn't explode like in 1902. It just folded in on itself, like a house of cards falling down. The old mine system finally gave up holding the weight of 70 years of accumulated damage. New mining had been the last straw. The sound could be heard for miles, a deep, thunderous roar that lasted almost 10 minutes. When it was over, a whole section of the mountain had sunk into the ground. The mining equipment was buried under millions of tons of rock. Nobody died. Jake's crew made it down the mountain just in time. Company executives who were flying in to investigate had to turn back when they couldn't find anywhere safe to land. I watched it all from the ranger station 2 miles away. Even at that distance, I could feel the ground shaking. Within hours, news crews showed up. Government investigators, mine safety officials who should have been there weeks ago. Everyone wanted to know how I'd predicted the collapse. I told them about the methane gas readings, the structural damage I'd observed, the historical connection to the 1902 disaster. I didn't mention the ghosts. Jake Sullivan backed up my story. Ranger Kowalski kept warning us we should have listened sooner. Strip Mining Solutions faced massive lawsuits and federal investigation. Turned out their safety equipment had been modified to mount POs. Ignore gas readings that would have shut down operations. They knew about the danger and kept working anyway. Just like the company in 1902. The area was permanently closed to mining. Too dangerous, the government said. Geologically unstable. A month later, I organized a memorial service for the 112 miners who died in 1902. Families came from all over, descendants of Polish, Italian, Slovak, and Irish immigrants who'd worked the mines. We put up proper headstones with all their names, including my great-uncle Stanislaw Kowalski. I found his remains in the collapsed tunnels, just where he'd shown me, gave him a proper burial with Catholic prayers in Polish, like my grandfather would have wanted. That night, I saw Uncle Stanislaw one last time. He appeared at the cemetery, standing next to his new headstone. "Thank you, little Davy. Will you rest now?" "Yes, all of us rest now. We did good work." He smiled, the first time I'd seen him smile. "Tell grandfather stories. Tell children about miners who died so others could live." Then he faded away like morning mist. I stayed as a ranger on Black Mountain for 10 more years. Became an expert on mine safety, spoke at conferences about industrial disasters and ghost towns. Always told people that the dead miners of 1902 were heroes. They saved lives by warning about dangers the living couldn't see. Some folks thought I was crazy, but Jake Sullivan and his mining crew knew better. They'd seen the ghost miners with their own eyes. Every October 15th, on the anniversary of the 1902 disaster, I visit the memorial. Sometimes I think I see safety lamps flickering in the forest. Sometimes I hear men singing hymns in languages I don't understand. But they sound peaceful now. Like men finally going home after a long, hard day's work. The mountain is quiet these days. Trees grow where the mining equipment used to be. Deer come back to graze in clearings. Birds sing in the morning. But I still tell visitors to stay away from the old mine openings. Some places remember their ghosts, and some warnings echo through time, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. My name is David Kowalski, and I learned that the dead don't always stay buried. Sometimes they come back to save the living. Sometimes they come back to keep promises they made before they died. And sometimes, if you're very quiet on October nights, you can still hear them singing in the darkness under Black Mountain. My name is Michael Clearwater, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. Half of those years I've spent in the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, flash floods, lost hikers, drug runners, you name it. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. I should tell you something about myself first. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 8. She filled my head with old stories about the mountains, about spirits that lived in the storms and the trees. I loved those stories, but I also learned to love science. Got my degree in meteorology before I became a ranger. I figured understanding weather patterns would help me keep people safe out here. That's what I do. Keep people safe. It's personal for me. When I was 12, my little brother Danny got caught in a storm while we were camping with our grandmother. Lightning hit the tree he was under. I still remember the smell of burned air and the way the thunder seemed to shake the whole world. Danny lived, but he was never quite the same after that. The doctors said it was brain damage from the electrical shock. He died 3 years later from complications. So yeah, I take weather safety seriously. I've made it my mission to teach every hiker who comes through here about storm dangers. I carry a weather radio, lightning detector, and I know the cloud formations like other people know their kids' faces. That's why what happened at Thunder Gap made no sense. No sense at all. Thunder Gap sits about 6 miles into the forest, accessible only by a narrow hiking trail that winds through some of the prettiest country you'll ever see. It's named for the way sound echoes between the rock walls. Even a whisper can bounce around for seconds. The Cherokee used to hold ceremonies there, my grandmother told me. Aid. It was a place where the sky spirits came down to earth. Most days, it's peaceful. Families come to picnic. Rock climbers love the cliff faces. Birdwatchers set up with their big cameras and wait for hours to catch a glimpse of the peregrine falcons that nest in the high crags. But lately something was wrong. It started with the animals. Deer wouldn't go near the gap anymore. Birds got quiet when you walked the trail. My dog Ranger, he's a German Shepherd mix I found abandoned as a pup, refused to go past the 3-mile marker. Just sat down and whined until I turned around. Then came the first incident. Sarah Chen, a college student from Duke University, was found at the bottom of Thunder Gap on a bright Tuesday morning in early June. No clouds in the sky. Temperature was 78 degrees. Humidity at 45%. Perfect hiking weather. She'd been struck by lightning. The coroner said the burn patterns were consistent with a direct strike. But that was impossible. There hadn't been a storm in the area for 6 days. The nearest rain clouds were over in Tennessee, more than 100 miles away. I examined the scene myself. Found her backpack 20 feet from the body, contents scattered like someone had dumped them out. Her metal water bottle was melted on one side. The rock where she'd been standing showed a clear lightning strike pattern. That spiderweb fracture you get when electricity hits stone. But here's the thing that bothered me most. The burn marks on Sarah's body weren't just random patterns. They looked almost like hoof prints. Circular marks about the size of a horse's hoof running down her back and arms. My supervisor, Jim Morrison, yes, like the singer, he never lets anyone forget it, chalked it up to freak atmospheric conditions. Said these things happen sometimes. Told me to write it up as an unusual weather event and move on. I tried to moan, on. But I couldn't stop thinking about those hoofprint burns, and I couldn't stop hearing my grandmother's voice in my head, telling me stories about the storm riders who lived in the lightning. 3 weeks later, it happened again. This time it was Robert Manning, a 43-year-old insurance salesman from Charlotte. He was hiking with his teenage son when the lightning came out of nowhere. Same perfect weather conditions. Same impossible circumstances. but Robert lived. I was first on the scene when his son called for help on his cell phone. Found Robert unconscious but breathing, lying in almost the exact same spot where Sarah Chen had died. His son, Tyler, was crouched beside him, shaking and crying. Dad was just standing there taking pictures, Tyler told me while I checked Robert's vitals. Then I heard this sound like horses running, really loud, and the air got cold and Dad started screaming and pointing at the sky. Then this huge lightning bolt came down and hit him. I looked up at the bright blue sky, not a cloud anywhere. "What did your dad see?" I asked. Tyler's eyes got wide. He said he saw soldiers on horses, riding in the clouds that weren't there. Robert came around while we were waiting for the medical helicopter. The first thing he said was, "Did you see them? The cavalry? They were coming right at me." The doctors at Mission Hospital said Robert would be fine. Burns on his back and shoulders, some temporary hearing loss, but nothing life-threatening. When I visited him the next day, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "They were real," he whispered. "I know how crazy it sounds, but they were real. Soldiers in old uniforms, riding horses made of lightning. Their leader had these cold eyes, like winter storms. He pointed at me right before the lightning hit. I wanted to dismiss it as hallucinations caused by electrical trauma. The brain does weird things when it gets shocked. But those hoofprint burns were real. And Tyler had heard the horses too. That night I drove out to see my grandmother's old friend, Thomas Climbing Bear. He's in his 80s now, one of the last Cherokee elders who still remembers the old stories. Lives in a small house near the reservation boundary. Thomas listened to everything I told him without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, just rocking in his chair on the front porch. "Your grandmother told me you might come asking about this someday," he finally said. "What do you mean?" "She saw it in a vision before she died. The storm riders coming back to Thunder Gap. Said it would happen when people brought too much anger to the sacred places." "Storm riders?" Thomas got up and went inside. Came back with an old photo album. Showed me drawings that looked like they'd been made with charcoal on bark paper. Horses with wild manes running through storm clouds. Soldiers with glowing eyes. During the Revolutionary War, British cavalry got caught in a supernatural storm at Thunder Gap. Legend says a Cherokee medicine man called up the lightning to protect our people from the soldiers. All 24 riders were struck and killed in one massive bolt. I stared at the drawings. The soldiers looked exactly like what Robert Manning had described. "But they didn't stay dead," Thomas continued. "Their spirits got caught in the storm, bound to ride the lightning forever. They only come back when there's violence and anger in their territory. Feed off it like wolves feed off meat. That's just a story, Thomas." He gave me a look that made me feel like a foolish child. "Is it? How many people you know get struck by lightning on clear days?" I drove home thinking about Sarah Chen and Robert Manning. Both had been alone when they were struck. Well, except for Robert's son. Both had been standing in the exact same spot. Both had been hit during perfect weather. But what violence was Thomas talking about? What anger? I got my answer 2 days later. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday. Domestic disturbance at one of the backcountry campsites near Thunder Gap. When I arrived, I found Mark and Jennifer Walsh screaming at each other while their 2 young kids cowered in their tent. "She's been cheating on me," Mark was yelling. "I found the texts on her phone." "You went through my phone?" Jennifer screamed back. "You paranoid piece of—" "Hey!" I stepped between them. "Let's calm down here." But they were past calming down. Mark grabbed Jennifer's arm. She slapped him. He raised his fist, and that's when I heard it. Thunder. Distant at first, like a storm rolling in from far away. But the sky was completely clear. Not even a wisp of cloud anywhere. The thunder got closer, louder, and underneath it, another sound that made my blood turn cold. Hoofbeats. The Walsh kids started crying. Their parents stopped fighting and looked around with confusion and growing fear. "What is that?" Jennifer whispered. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in about 5 seconds. The wind picked up, swirling leaves and dust around our feet. And still that sound. Thunder and horses getting closer and closer. Then I saw them. They materialized out of the clear air like smoke taking shape. 24 riders on 24 horses, all made of crackling electricity and storm clouds. They charged down from the sky in a line, their mounts' hooves striking sparks off the air itself. The leader rode a massive warhorse with a mane of pure lightning. He wore a British officer's uniform from the 1700s, but it was burned and tattered. His face was pale as winter fog, his eyes like blue fire. When he looked at me, I felt like I was drowning in ice water. "Violence calls us," he said, and his voice was the sound of thunder rolling through mountains. "Anger feeds us. You have brought both to our sacred ground." Mark and Jennifer Walsh were pressed together now, all their fighting forgotten. Their children had gone completely silent in their terror. The ghost captain raised one arm, and lightning began to gather around his fist like he was holding a ball of electricity. "Your grandmother taught you the old ways, Michael Clearwater," the captain said to me. "Use them now, or watch these people die." How did he know my name? How did he know about my grandmother? But there was no time to ask questions. The lightning in the captain's hand was getting brighter. The other 23 riders had formed a circle around us, their horses snorting electricity and pawing at the ground with sparking hooves. I thought about what Thomas Climbing Bear had said. The riders fed on anger and violence. They'd been called back by the fighting. "Mark, Jennifer," I said quietly, "you need to stop this. Right now." "Stop what?" Mark's voice was shaking. "The fighting. The anger. That's what brought them here." "That's crazy," Jennifer whispered. The captain's laugh sounded like trees splitting in half during a storm. "Tell them about your brother, Ranger. Tell them what lightning can do." Images of Danny flashed through my mind. The way he'd looked after the lightning hit him. The slow way he'd faded over 3 years. "They're going to kill you," I told the Walshes. "All of you, including your kids. The only way to stop them is to let go of the anger." Mark looked at his wife. Jennifer looked at her children. The lightning in the captain's hand pulsed brighter. "I'm sorry," Mark said suddenly. "Jenny, I'm sorry. I was wrong to go through your phone. I was wrong about everything." "I'm sorry too," Jennifer replied, tears streaming down her face. "I was texting my ex-boyfriend, but it wasn't what you think. He's going through a divorce, and I was trying to help him. I should have told you." The lightning in the captain's hand flickered. "Keep going," I urged them. They talked, really talked, maybe for the first time in months, about their marriage, their problems, their fears, about how they'd let anger and suspicion poison what they'd once had. And slowly, incredibly, the storm riders began to fade. The captain was the last to disappear. Before he vanished completely, he looked at me one more time. "You have the gift, Michael Clearwater. Your grandmother was right. But this is only the beginning. The anger grows stronger every day." Then they were gone, and we were alone under the clear blue sky. The Walshes packed up and left within the hour. They thanked me, but I could see in their eyes that they were already starting to doubt what they'd seen. By the time they got home, they'd probably convinced themselves it had been some kind of mass hallucination brought on by stress. But I knew better. The storm riders of Thunder Gap were real. They were bound to this place, drawn by violence and conflict. And people brought plenty of both into the mountains every day. I had to find a way to stop them, before they killed someone who couldn't be reasoned with. Before they killed someone whose anger was too strong to overcome. The big test came 3 weeks later during the annual Wilson family reunion. The Wilsons had been coming to Thunder Gap for their family gathering every summer for 15 years. Usually it was a peaceful event, barbecue, games, kids running around while the adults caught up. But this year was different. This year Uncle Frank had died and left everything to his nephew David instead of his brother Paul. This year there was a 40-year-old grudge about a business deal gone wrong. This year there was enough anger and resentment to call down a cavalry of dead soldiers. I tried to prevent it. When I saw the Wilson family setting up their campsite, I went over and tried to explain about the lightning danger. Told them about the unusual atmospheric conditions in the area, suggested they might want to find a different spot for their reunion. Paul Wilson, the family patriarch, just laughed at me. "Son, we've been coming here for 15 years, never had so much as a rain cloud spoil our party," I persisted. "Sir, there have been some unusual lightning strikes in this area recently, even on clear days." Lightning on clear days. David Wilson snorted. He was Paul's nephew, about 35, wearing an expensive polo shirt and a Rolex watch. "That's impossible." "I've seen it happen, sir." "Well, then you're either lying or crazy," Paul said. "Either way, we're staying put." I should have called in backup, should have found some official reason to shut down their campsite. But I didn't, and by evening, things started getting ugly. It began with small arguments. Who brought what food? Why Cousin Lisa's kids were being so loud? Whether Uncle Frank really intended to leave David all that money. But as the sun went down and the beer and whiskey came out, the arguments got bigger. Voices got louder. Old wounds got ripped open. I was patrolling nearby when I heard the shouting start. By the time I got to their campsite, Paul and David were nose to nose, screaming at each other about Frank's will. "He was my brother," Paul yelled. "That money should have gone to family, not some spoiled little—" "I was like a son to him," David shot back. "More than you ever were. You never even visited him in the hospital." Other family members chose sides. Accusations flew. Someone threw a beer bottle. Someone else shoved someone. And that's when I felt the familiar drop in temperature. The thunder started low and far away, but this time it was different, louder, angrier. The hoofbeats sounded like a stampede. "Everyone needs to calm down right now," I announced in my loudest ranger voice, but they were too caught up in their family drama to listen. Paul shoved David. David punched Paul in the jaw. Paul's wife started screaming at David's wife. The kids started crying. And out of the clear night sky, the storm riders came. 24 British cavalry soldiers on 24 lightning horses charging down from the stars. Their leaders' eyes blazed brighter than I'd ever seen them. The electricity crackling around their horses' hooves was so intense it lit up the campsite like daylight. This time, the Wilsons couldn't ignore what they were seeing. People screamed. Kids ran. Several adults fainted on the spot. The captain raised his arm, and lightning began to build around his fist like a miniature sun. But this wasn't the controlled display I'd seen before. This was raw, lethal power. Enough electricity to kill everyone in the campsite. "Your anger has grown too strong," the captain said, his voice like a hurricane wind. "You have poisoned this sacred ground with your hatred. We will cleanse it with fire." I stepped forward, putting myself between the ghost cavalry and the Wilson family. "Captain," I said, "these people can change. They can let go of their anger, just like the others did." The captain's cold eyes focused on me. "Look around you, Ranger. Do you see forgiveness here? Do you see peace?" I looked. Paul Wilson was still clenched in fighting stance, even with 24 ghost soldiers pointing lightning at him. David was backing toward his car, but his face was full of rage, not fear. Other family members were shouting blame and accusations, even as supernatural horses snorted electricity above their heads. "Some anger runs too deep," the captain said. "Some wounds are too old to heal. We have waited long enough for justice." The lightning in his fist pulsed brighter. The other riders raised their own hands, electricity dancing between their fingers. I thought about my grandmother, about the stories she used to tell me, about the old Cherokee ceremonies she'd taught me before she died. "Then let me take their anger," I said. The captain paused. "What did you say?" "Cherokee tradition. One person can take on the spiritual burden of the community. I'll accept their anger, their guilt, their pain, all of it." "Michael, no," said a familiar voice behind me. I turned. Thomas Climbing Bear was walking into the campsite, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick. How had he gotten here so fast? How had he even known? "It's the only way, Thomas," I said. "You don't understand what you're offering," the old man replied. "To accept that much anger, that much pain, it could destroy you." "My brother died because of lightning," I said. "I've carried that anger for 20 years. What's a little more?" The captain studied me with those ice-blue eyes. You would take their hatred into yourself, bear their grudges and their spite. I would. And if it kills you, then at least they'll live. At least their children will live. Thomas Climbing Bear began to chant in Cherokee, words I recognized from the old ceremonies my grandmother had taught me. The captain listened, his expression unreadable. Very well, the captain said finally. We accept your sacrifice, Michael Clearwater. But understand, once you take their anger, it becomes part of you. Forever. I nodded. I understand. The captain raised his arms, and all 24 riders began to glow with electrical energy. But instead of striking outward, the lightning flowed toward me. It hit me like being punched by God. Every grudge Paul Wilson had ever held flooded into my mind. Every slight, every betrayal, every moment of rage. David's greed and selfishness crashed over me like a wave. The petty jealousies and bitter resentments of 3 generations of the Wilson family poured into my soul like molten metal. I fell to my knees, screaming. It felt like my brain was being torn apart by electricity and hatred. I could taste blood. My vision went white, but I held on. For Danny, for my grandmother, for the Cherokee ancestors who had made this place sacred. When the lightning stopped, I was lying on the ground, smoke rising from my clothes. The Wilson family was staring at me in shock and horror, and the storm riders were gone. That was 3 months ago, the Wilson family reunion, and ended early, obviously. Most of them drove straight home that night, though a few stayed to make sure I was okay. Paul and David Wilson both came to see me in the hospital. They apologized. Really, genuinely apologized for their behavior. Said they couldn't understand why they'd been so angry, why family had seemed less important than money. The anger was gone from them, you see. I'd taken it into myself. The doctors said I'd suffered some kind of electrical trauma, though they couldn't explain how it had happened on a clear night. My supervisor, Jim Morrison, wrote it up as a training accident with faulty equipment. The Wilson family backed up that story. None of them wanted to try explaining about ghost cavalry to the Park Service. I recovered mostly. Some nerve damage in my left hand, occasional headaches, and the dreams, of course. I dream about things that aren't my memories, other people's grudges and hurts and anger. It's like carrying around a bag of broken glass in my head. But it's manageable. Thomas Climbing Bear taught me meditation techniques that help, and the anger isn't growing anymore. That's the important thing, because I'm not the only one who can do this. Thomas has been training other Cherokee volunteers, people who understand the old ways and can serve as spiritual peacekeepers when needed. We've established a network of people who monitor the Cherokee sacred sites throughout the region, watching for signs of supernatural activity. The Park Service has started recognizing these places as culturally significant. We hold official Cherokee ceremonies at Thunder Gap twice a year now, with Thomas leading prayers to honor the storm spirits and maintain the balance. And there haven't been any more lightning strikes on clear days. Well, almost none. Last week, a group of college kids got into a fight at Thunder Gap, something about a girl and 2 boyfriends. I got there before the shouting turned physical, before the temperature dropped, before the thunder started. These days, I can sense when the storm riders are stirring. It's lit, key having a barometer in my bones. I helped the kids work through their problems, got them talking instead of fighting. The danger passed. But I know Captain Hayes and his 23 riders are still out there, still bound to their eternal patrol. They're waiting in the storms, ready to ride whenever anger and violence poison the sacred places. And I'll be waiting too. It's my job now, part park ranger, part spiritual guardian, part lightning rod for other people's rage. My grandmother always said the mountains choose their protectors. I guess they chose me. Some nights, when the storms roll through, I swear I can hear hoofbeats in the thunder. Not coming for me. I've earned their respect, I think, but reminding me that they're there, still riding, still watching, still ready to bring lightning down on anyone foolish enough to bring violence to Thunder Gap. The Cherokee knew what they were doing when they made this place sacred. Some spirits shouldn't be disturbed. But if you're respectful, if you come in peace, Thunder Gap is still one of the most beautiful places in North Carolina. The falcon still nests in the high rocks. The echo still carries your voice around the stone walls. Just remember to leave your anger in the parking lot. The storm riders don't forgive, and lightning, even on the clearest day, can always find you.